There was once a young family who lived in a small, secluded house in the countryside. The parents were overprotective of their only daughter and had installed state-of-the-art security systems to ensure her safety. One night, as the family was getting ready for bed, they heard a strange noise coming from the first floor. The father cautiously went to investigate, but found nothing out of the ordinary. However, as they settled back into bed, they heard a noise again, this time accompanied by the sound of footsteps. Suddenly, the front door burst open and several masked intruders stormed into the house. The family was thrown into a state of panic as the intruders ransacked their home, searching for something of value. The parents desperately tried to protect their daughter, but the intruders were relentless. As the night wore on, it became clear that the intruders were not interested in theft, but in something much more sinister. The young daughter suddenly realized that she had seen the intruders before. They were the same people who had been following her for the past few weeks, watching her every move. She had thought that her parents' security measures would keep her safe, but she was wrong. The family was trapped, at the mercy of the intruders who seemed to have a twisted and malicious intent. The hours passed by in a blur of fear and confusion, and the family realized that they were not alone in their own home. To this day, no one knows what happened to the young family. Some say that they were taken by the intruders, never to be seen again. Others say that they still live in the house, but are forever changed by the traumatic events of that fateful night. Once upon a time, there was a small, isolated town known as Silent Hill. The town was named after the eerie silence that surrounded it, and its residents were known for their strange, reclusive behavior. Over time, the town became known for its strange occurrences and ghostly apparitions, leading many to believe that it was haunted. Despite its reputation, a small group of friends decided to take a camping trip to Silent Hill, eager to explore the abandoned buildings and learn more about the town's haunted history. However, as soon as they arrived, they noticed that something was off. The air was thick with an unearthly stillness, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. As they began to set up camp, they heard strange whispers and moans coming from the surrounding woods. They tried to ignore the eerie sounds and continued with their preparations, but the whispers grew louder and more insistent. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from the very heart of the town. Terrified, the friends decided to leave Silent Hill immediately. But as they gathered their things and made their way back to their car, they realized that they were lost. The road they had taken to reach the town was no longer there, and they were surrounded by dense, impenetrable woods. As they stumbled through the darkness, they caught glimpses of ghostly figures moving in the shadows. The whispers grew louder and more frenzied, and the friends realized that they were being stalked by the spirits of the town's long-dead residents. Just when they thought all was lost, they stumbled upon a narrow path that led them back to the main road. They fled Silent Hill as fast as they could, vowing never to return. To this day, no one knows what truly happened in that ghost town, and those who venture too close are said to never return. One dark and stormy night, a young couple found themselves lost in a sprawling cemetery. The couple had taken a wrong turn on their way home and had become disoriented in the labyrinthine maze of headstones and graves. As they stumbled through the darkness, they heard strange whispers and moans coming from the surrounding tombs. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see their way. The couple tried to retrace their steps, but the graves seemed to shift and change in the darkness, leading them further and further astray. Suddenly, they heard the sound of footsteps behind them and spun around, but there was no one there. Panic set in as they realized that they were being watched. The couple picked up their pace, running blindly through the cemetery, dodging headstones and tripping over graves. But no matter how fast they ran, the footsteps were always right behind them. As they reached the center of the cemetery, they stumbled upon an old mausoleum. The couple had no choice but to take refuge inside. hoping to escape the unseen presence that was stalking them. As they huddled together in the mausoleum, they heard a voice whisper, "You will never leave this place." The couple screamed in terror as they realized that they were trapped, lost forever in a twisted, haunted cemetery. To this day, no one knows what happened to the young couple. Some say that they still wander the cemetery, lost and alone, forever haunted by the spirits of the dead. One dark and stormy night, a young couple found themselves lost in a sprawling cemetery. The couple had taken a wrong turn on their way home and had become disoriented in the labyrinthine maze of headstones and graves. As they stumbled through the darkness, they heard strange whispers and moans coming from the surrounding tombs. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see their way. The couple tried to retrace their steps, but the graves seemed to shift and change in the darkness, leading them further and further astray. Suddenly, they heard the sound of footsteps behind them and spun around, but there was no one there. Panic set in as they realized that they were being watched. The couple picked up their pace, running blindly through the cemetery, dodging headstones and tripping over graves. But no matter how fast they ran, the footsteps were always right behind them. As they reached the center of the cemetery, they stumbled upon an old mausoleum. The couple had no choice but to take refuge inside, hoping to escape the unseen presence that was stalking them. As they huddled together in the mausoleum, they heard a voice whisper, "You will never leave this place." The couple screamed in terror as they realized that they were trapped, lost forever in a twisted, haunted cemetery. To this day, no one knows what happened to the young couple. Some say that they still wander the cemetery, lost and alone, forever haunted by the spirits of the dead. There was once a small village at the edge of a vast and foreboding forest. The villagers lived in fear of the forest and the creatures that dwelled within it, for it was said that strange and evil things lurked among the trees. One night, a young woman named Sarah decided to venture into the forest to gather firewood. She had heard the stories, but she was brave and did not believe the tales of danger. As she went deeper into the woods, she began to feel a creeping sense of unease. The leaves rustled ominously in the wind, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. Suddenly, Sarah heard a low growl, and she turned to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her from the darkness. She started to run, but the growling grew louder and she could hear the sound of heavy footsteps pounding the ground behind her. Just as she thought she was about to be caught, she stumbled upon a clearing and saw a cabin. Sarah pounded on the door, but there was no answer. Desperate and with nowhere else to turn, she decided to take refuge inside. To her horror, she found that the cabin was filled with strange and unsettling objects, jars of preserved body parts, strange symbols scrawled on the walls, and a book open on a table with pages written in an ancient language. As she turned to leave the cabin, Sarah heard a voice whisper, "You should not have come here." She spun around to see a figure standing in the shadows, its features obscured by the darkness. Sarah screamed and ran for the door, but when she reached it, she found that it would not budge. The figure began to move towards her, its eyes glowing red, and Sarah realized that she was trapped. She never returned from the forest, and the villagers whispered of the young woman who had been taken by the evil that lived among the trees. To this day, travelers who venture into the forest say that they can still hear her screams echoing through the trees on dark and stormy nights. There was a mansion on the outskirts of town that was said to be haunted. The residents of the town whispered about strange noises and ghostly apparitions that could be seen in the windows at night. Despite the rumors, a family moved into the mansion and decided to make it their home. At first, everything seemed fine. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen. The family would hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, doors would creak open and shut on their own, and they would catch glimpses of ghostly figures moving in the shadows. The family tried to ignore the strange occurrences, but they grew more and more frequent and intense. One night, as they were sitting down to dinner, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from upstairs. The father went to investigate, but when he reached the top of the stairs, he was pulled into the darkness by an unseen force. The rest of the family ran from the mansion, never to return. Years later, a group of teenagers decided to explore the abandoned mansion, hoping to find evidence of the ghostly residents. As they entered a main hallway, they heard a voice whisper, "You should have stayed away." Suddenly, the lights went out, and the teenagers found themselves trapped in the mansion, pursued by the vengeful spirits who had taken up residence there. They say that on dark and stormy nights, you can still hear the screams of the teenagers echoing through the halls of a haunted mansion. Those who dare to venture too close to the mansion never return, adding to the growing list of those who have fallen prey to its ghostly. There was a small town that was plagued by a series of strange and unsettling events. People would disappear without a trace, and their bodies would turn up days later with no signs of injury or struggle. The townspeople whispered about a monster that lived in the nearby woods, and many of them refused to venture into the forest after dark. One night, a young couple named Sarah and David decided to take a walk in the woods. As they strolled hand in hand, they suddenly heard a rustling in the bushes behind them. Sarah turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just as she turned back to face forward, she was snatched away by an unseen force. David ran back to the town to get help, but when they returned to the woods, Sarah was nowhere to be found. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of Sarah. David was consumed by grief and refused to give up hope. He spent every waking moment searching for his lost love. And then, one night, he heard a voice calling his name. He followed the voice, deeper into the woods, until he came upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a figure, shrouded in darkness. David approached the figure, and as he got closer, he could see that it was Sarah. But something was different about her. Her eyes were cold and lifeless, and her skin was a sickly pale color. She reached out to him, and as she did, her face transformed into a grotesque and terrifying monster. David screamed and ran back to the town, never to return to the woods. Once upon a time, there was a brave individual named John who worked as a government analyst. John stumbled upon some classified information that revealed corrupt practices within the government. He felt it was his civic duty to expose the truth and become a whistleblower. However, his actions did not go unnoticed. John started receiving anonymous threats, warning him to keep quiet or face the consequences. Despite being intimidated, John continued to speak out and share the information with the public. One day, while walking home from work, John noticed that he was being followed by a mysterious figure dressed in black. He tried to shake the individual off by taking different routes, but the figure always managed to keep up. John soon realized that he was being stalked by a shadow government organization that aimed to silence him permanently. John's life turned into a nightmare as he was constantly looking over his shoulder, unable to trust anyone. His phone was tapped, his emails were monitored, and his every move was watched. He was in a race against time to expose the corruption and get out alive. One stormy night, John was awakened by a loud noise coming from his front door. He cautiously approached the door, only to find that it had been forced open. In the darkness, he could make out the figure of a hooded person holding a gun. In a panic, John ran to the back of his house and tried to escape through the window, but the hooded figure was already there, waiting for him. John was never seen or heard from again. The information he had uncovered was never made public, and the shadow government continued its corrupt practices, operating in the shadows and silencing anyone who dared to speak out. To this day, John's disappearance remains a mystery, and the truth about the shadow government remains buried with him. It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was driving home from work. She had been on the road for hours, and she was starting to feel tired. Suddenly, she saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. She slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car hit the figure and swerved off the road, coming to a stop in a ditch. Sarah was dazed and confused, but she managed to climb out of the car. She looked around and saw that the figure was gone. She started to feel afraid and wondered if it had been a ghost. She tried to start the car, but it wouldn't start. She was stuck in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, and the storm was getting worse. As she sat there, shivering in the rain, she heard a strange noise. It sounded like someone was laughing. She looked out the window and saw a figure in the distance. It was the same figure she had hit, but now it was standing still and looking straight at her. She could see its eyes glowing in the dark, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Suddenly, the car's engine started on its own, and the headlights turned on. Sarah was terrified, but she managed to drive away as fast as she could. She didn't stop until she was miles away from the accident site. When she looked in the rearview mirror, she saw the ghostly figure still standing where she had left it. From that day on, Sarah never drove on that road again. She heard that other drivers had seen the same ghostly figure and had been involved in accidents. She was convinced that it was the ghost of a person who had died in a car crash on that road many years ago, and she was scared that it was seeking revenge on those who drove too fast or carelessly. Amy and her best friend, Sarah, had been planning a weekend camping trip for months. They were both adventurous and loved to explore new places, so they decided to go to a remote forest they had never been to before. When they arrived, they set up camp and started to explore the area. They hiked for hours, taking in the sights and sounds of the forest. But as the sun started to set, Sarah suddenly disappeared. Amy searched for her for hours, but she couldn't find any sign of her friend. Desperate, Amy decided to go to the nearest town to get help. When she arrived, she told the authorities about Sarah's disappearance, but they didn't take her seriously. They told her that Sarah was probably just lost and would turn up soon. But Amy had a feeling that something was wrong. She felt a strange presence in the forest, and she was sure that Sarah was in danger. She decided to go back to the forest and search for her friend again. This time, as she was searching, she heard strange noises in the distance. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but then she heard what sounded like whispers. She followed the sound and found a clearing with a large tree in the center. She felt a chill run down her spine when she saw that the tree was covered in strange symbols. As she stood there, she heard Sarah's voice coming from the tree. She tried to reach for her, but her hand went right through the tree as if it were a ghost. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder and more sinister, and Amy realized that she was in the presence of a haunting. She ran back to the town as fast as she could, but she never saw Sarah again. She never forgot the haunting she experienced that night, and she always wondered what had happened to her best friend. Years later, Amy returned to the forest and saw that the tree was still there, still covered in symbols. She never went near it again, but she could feel its presence every time she went back to the forest. She always wondered if Sarah's ghost was still trapped there, haunting the forest forever. There was a small town that was known for its old, abandoned mansion on the outskirts. It was said that the mansion was haunted by the ghosts of its former owners, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. People in the town avoided the mansion and whispered tales of strange disappearances that occurred near it. Some claimed to have seen ghostly figures moving behind the windows, while others reported hearing strange noises and footsteps coming from the mansion at night. One night, a group of teenagers decided to explore the mansion as a dare. They entered the building and immediately felt a sense of unease. The air was thick with a strange, musty smell, and they could hear whispers and footsteps echoing through the empty halls. As they explored the mansion, they suddenly heard a scream coming from one of the upstairs rooms. When they went to investigate, They found a window that was shaking as if something was trying to get in. When they looked closer, they saw a ghostly face pressed against the glass, screaming in terror. The teenagers ran from the mansion as fast as they could, but one of them never made it out. She disappeared without a trace and was never seen again. The others told the authorities what had happened, but no one believed them. Years passed, and the mansion remained abandoned and untouched. But people in the town still whispered about the strange disappearances and the ghostly figures that could be seen in the windows on dark, moonless nights. They say that if you listen closely, you can still hear the scream of the ghost that haunts the mansion, and the footsteps of those who disappeared within its walls. Jane and her best friend, Emily, had been inseparable since childhood. They did everything together and shared all their secrets. But one day, Jane started to feel strange. She was dizzy and had a headache, and she felt like she was always tired. She went to the doctor, but they couldn't find anything wrong with her. Days turned into weeks, and Jane's condition only got worse. She was in constant pain and could barely get out of bed. She was sure she had a serious illness, but the doctors still couldn't find anything wrong with her. Then, one day, Jane found a bottle of poison in Emily's room. She was shocked and couldn't believe that her best friend would do something like this to her. She confronted Emily, who admitted that she had been slowly poisoning Jane for weeks because she was jealous of the attention Jane was getting from their mutual friends. Jane was horrified and didn't know what to do. She had never suspected that her best friend could be capable of something like this. She went to the police, but it was too late. The poison had already taken effect, and she was too weak to survive. In the end, Jane died from the poison, and Emily was arrested for her murder. But even as she was taken away, Jane's ghost could feel Emily's presence, still lurking and taunting her even after death. From beyond the grave, Jane was still trapped in her best friend's sinister web of deceit and poison. Years passed, and the old house where Jane and Emily lived became abandoned and forgotten. But some say that on quiet nights, they can still hear the sound of Jane's ghost, crying out for justice and revenge against the friend who betrayed her. Once upon a time, there was a janitor named Sam who worked the night shift at an old, abandoned school. The school had a reputation for being haunted, but Sam didn't believe in ghosts, so he took the job anyway. One night, Sam was cleaning the basement when he heard strange noises coming from one of the classrooms. He cautiously approached the room, only to find that all the desks and chairs had been knocked over and the chalkboard was covered in strange symbols. Suddenly, the lights went out, and Sam felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He quickly ran out of the room and back to his janitor's closet, but the door was jammed shut from the outside. The next morning, the police arrived at the school and found a dead body in the classroom where Sam had heard the strange noises. Sam was arrested and charged with the murder. Despite his protests of innocence, the evidence against him was overwhelming. The janitor's closet had been locked from the inside, and his fingerprints were found all over the murder weapon. However, the real culprit was the ghost of a former student who had died in the classroom many years before. The ghost had been seeking revenge against the school and anyone who entered it after dark. Sam was merely a pawn in the ghost's game, framed for a crime he didn't commit. The ghost was never caught, and Sam was sentenced to life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. To this day, the abandoned school remains haunted, and the ghost continues to torment anyone who dares to enter after dark. A young and adventurous cave explorer named Emma was always on the hunt for new and undiscovered caves to explore. One day, she heard about a remote and abandoned cave system that was said to be haunted by the spirits of miners who had died there many years before. Emma was skeptical about the ghost stories, but she was determined to see the cave for herself and prove that there was nothing to fear. She packed her gear and set out on her journey, eager to be the first person to explore the caves in years. As she made her way deeper into the caves, Emma started to experience strange and unsettling events. She heard the sounds of ghostly whispers echoing off the walls and felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. Despite her growing fear, she pressed on, determined to reach the end of the cave and prove that the ghost stories were nothing more than superstitions. However, as she turned a corner, she was met with a ghostly apparition of a miner, his eyes blazing with anger. Emma tried to turn back and run, but she was blocked by another ghost, this one a young woman who was said to have died in the cave while searching for her lost husband. The two ghosts converged on Emma, their ghostly forms glowing in the darkness. Emma realized too late that she had entered a portal to the afterlife, and the ghosts were seeking revenge against anyone who dared to disturb their final resting place. Trapped and alone, Emma screamed in terror as the ghosts closed in on her, determined to keep her trapped in the cave forever. Emma was never seen or heard from again, and her body was never found. The abandoned cave remains off limits to this day, a testament to the ghosts that still haunt its depths and a warning to those who would dare to disturb them. The residents of a small town were going about their normal daily routines when they suddenly noticed something strange in the sky. Giant figures, larger than any building in the town, were descending from the clouds and slowly making their way towards the ground. Panic and chaos erupted as the townspeople tried to flee from the ominous figures, but there was nowhere to hide. The figures landed in the center of the town, their massive feet crushing buildings and sending shockwaves through the streets. The townspeople soon realized that the figures were not from this world. They were beings from another dimension, and they had come to Earth for a reason unknown to anyone. The figures began to march through the town, their movements slow and deliberate. As the townspeople huddled in fear, they noticed that the figures were leaving behind a trail of destruction in their wake. Homes were reduced to rubble, and entire blocks were leveled. The townspeople realized that they were in grave danger, and they could only hope that the figures would spare their lives. But their hopes were in vain. The figures continued to march through the town, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Eventually, they reached the outskirts of the town and disappeared back into the sky, leaving behind a town in ruins and its residents traumatized and afraid. From that day on, the residents of the town lived in fear, wondering if the figures would return and bring with them more destruction and terror. To this day, no one knows where the figures came from or what their purpose was, but the memory of their arrival still haunts the town and its people. There was a large city that was plagued by a mysterious entity known only as the Night Stalker. It was said that this dark humanoid only appeared at night, and it would terrorize the city's inhabitants with its haunting presence. People reported seeing the Night Stalker in their dreams, and some claimed to have seen it lurking in the shadows on the streets. It was said that anyone who looked directly into its eyes would be frozen with fear, unable to move or scream for help. As the night progressed, the Night Stalker would grow more and more powerful, feeding on the fear of those it terrorized. Some nights, it was so powerful that it could control the minds of entire crowds of people, making them do its bidding. Despite numerous attempts to catch the Night Stalker, it always seemed to slip away into the shadows. The police were powerless to stop it, and the city was thrown into a state of constant fear. One day, a young girl came forward with a plan to defeat the Night Stalker. She claimed that she had seen it in her dreams and that she knew its weakness. She led a group of brave people into the city's dark alleys, determined to put an end to the Night Stalker's reign of terror. In the end, they managed to confront the Night Stalker and defeat it, freeing the city from its grip of fear. But to this day, some say that the Night Stalker still haunts the city, waiting for the right moment to return and claim its power once again. There was a small, isolated village nestled in the heart of a dense forest. The villagers lived a peaceful life, never venturing too far from their homes and always keeping to themselves. One day, a stranger came to the village and told the villagers of a haunted house deep in the forest. The villagers had heard of the house before, but they had never dared to venture that far into the woods. But the stranger was insistent, telling them that the house was the source of all the evil that plagued the village. Despite their fears, a group of brave villagers decided to venture into the forest to investigate the haunted house. As they approached the house, they saw that it was surrounded by a dense fog that obscured their vision. When they finally reached the house, they were horrified to discover that it was inhabited by a horde of ghostly creatures. The creatures were hostile and aggressive, and they seemed to be fueled by an insatiable hunger for human flesh. The villagers fought desperately for their lives, but they were vastly outnumbered. In the end, only a handful managed to escape the house and make it back to the village. From that day forward, the villagers never ventured into the forest again. They told the tale of the haunted house to generations of their descendants, warning them never to venture too far from the safety of the village. And to this day, the house remains abandoned, its ghostly inhabitants still lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next victims. There was a tree in the middle of a dense forest, known as the Cursed Tree. It was said that anyone who stepped foot near it would be cursed with bad luck and misfortune for the rest of their days. Many villagers lived in fear of the tree and warned travelers to stay away. But there was a brave young man who lived in the village, and he didn't believe in the curse. He was determined to prove that the tree was just a myth and set out one day to confront it. When he arrived at the tree, he was amazed to find that it was just an ordinary tree, but with strange markings carved into its trunk. He reached out to touch the markings, but as soon as his fingers brushed against the rough bark, he felt a jolt of energy run through his body. Suddenly, the tree came to life. Its branches reached out, trying to grab the young man, but he managed to escape and ran back to the village to tell everyone what had happened. The villagers were horrified and urged the young man to leave the forest, but he refused. He was determined to find a way to break the curse and save the tree. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months as the young man spent every waking moment studying the tree and the curse. Finally, one night under the light of a full moon, he found the answer. The curse could only be broken if someone offered their own life to the tree in sacrifice. The young man didn't hesitate. He returned to the cursed tree and climbed to the top, where he offered his own life to break the curse. The tree accepted his sacrifice, and a bright light exploded from its branches. When the light faded, the tree was no longer a menacing presence. In the heart of a dark, sprawling city, there was a tall, foreboding building known as the Black Tower. The tower was abandoned and had been for as long as anyone could remember, but strange rumors and whispers about it circulated among the city's inhabitants. Some claimed that it was haunted by the spirits of those who had lived and died within its walls, while others whispered of strange noises and lights that could be seen in the tower's windows at night. Despite the warnings, a group of adventurous teenagers decided to explore the Black Tower one night. They snuck into the building and began to make their way up the rickety stairs to the top. But as they climbed higher and higher, they began to feel a growing sense of unease. The air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to close in around them. When they finally reached the top floor, they found themselves in a large, empty room. But in the center of the room was a strange, glowing orb, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. The teenagers were curious and approached the orb, drawn in by its eerie light. As soon as their fingers touched the surface of the orb, they were transported to a strange, alternate world. They found themselves in a nightmare landscape of twisted, gnarled trees and putrid, swampy ground. Horrible creatures lurked in the shadows, and the sky was a sickly shade of green. The teenagers soon realized that they were trapped in this strange world, unable to escape. They were forced to face their deepest fears and confront the horrors that lurked in the darkness. But just when all hope seemed lost, they discovered that the only way to escape was to face their fears head-on and destroy the source of the evil that had trapped them there. They set out on a dangerous journey, fighting against overwhelming odds and battling their own inner demons. In the end, they were victorious and managed to destroy the source of the evil, breaking the spell and returning home. But they were forever changed by their experience, and the memory of the Black Tower and the strange world they had visited would haunt them for the rest of their lives. There was a small, isolated village at the foot of a dense, dark forest. The villagers lived simple lives, but they were plagued by strange and frightening occurrences. Every night, a ghostly figure would appear in the village, causing mischief and terrorizing the residents. No one knew who or what the ghost was, but it was said to be the spirit of a long-dead witch, seeking revenge on those who had wronged her in life. One day, a young woman from the village decided she'd had enough of the witch's reign of terror. She was determined to put an end to it, no matter what it took. She journeyed into the heart of the forest, determined to find the witch's grave and put her spirit to rest once and for all. The young woman soon found herself lost in the dense, tangled undergrowth, but she refused to give up. She pushed on, deeper and deeper into the forest, until she finally stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a withered old tree, with a single, glowing orb hanging from one of its branches. The young woman approached the tree, drawn in by the strange, pulsing light of the orb. But as soon as her fingers touched the surface of the orb, she was transported to a strange and terrifying alternate world. She found herself face to face with the witch, who had been waiting for her. The witch revealed that she had been trapped in that world for centuries, bound to the tree by a powerful spell. The only way to break the spell was for someone to take her place, and the young woman had stumbled upon her prison by accident. The witch offered her a choice. She could either take the witch's place and be trapped in the alternate world for all eternity, or she could return home and allow the witch to continue her reign of terror in the village. The young woman was faced with a difficult decision, but in the end, she made a brave choice. She took the witch's place, sacrificing herself to save her village. The spell was broken, and the witch was finally put to rest. And the young woman was remembered as a hero, a brave soul who had given her life to save others. Once upon a time, there was a mercenary named Jack who lived a life of solitude, traveling from one war-torn country to another, taking on dangerous jobs that paid well. He was known to be one of the best marksmen in the world, and he was feared by those who crossed his path. One day, Jack received a mysterious job offer from a wealthy client. The client offered him an exorbitant amount of money to carry out a mission in a remote, abandoned town in the middle of a dense forest. Jack accepted the job, intrigued by the challenge and the money. As Jack entered the town, he felt a chill run down his spine. The town was completely silent, and there was not a single soul in sight. The buildings were decrepit, and the air was heavy with an eerie feeling. Jack soon realized that something was off about this mission. As he made his way through the deserted streets, he suddenly heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was the sound of footsteps, but not just any footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, as if someone was stalking him. Jack quickly unsheathed his weapon and took cover behind a nearby wall. The footsteps grew louder, and Jack could feel his heart racing in his chest. Suddenly, a figure appeared from around the corner, and Jack aimed his weapon. To his shock, he saw that the figure was a ghostly apparition, with a pale complexion and piercing, empty eyes. Jack was frozen with fear, unable to move or even speak. The ghostly figure slowly approached Jack, who was now paralyzed with fear. Just as the figure was about to reach him, Jack suddenly woke up, drenched in sweat. He realized that it was all a nightmare, but he couldn't shake off the feeling of terror that had gripped him. From that day on, Jack was plagued by nightmares of the ghostly figure. He couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that had taken hold of him, and he soon realized that the job offer he had accepted was cursed. He tried to back out of the job, but it was too late. He was already caught in the grasp of the evil forces that haunted the abandoned town. From that day on, Jack was never seen or heard from again. Some say that he was consumed by the evil forces that haunted the town, while others say that he still roams the earth, cursed to be hunted by the ghostly apparition for all eternity. There once was a small village, surrounded by dense forests and tall mountains. The villagers lived simple lives, and they were content with what they had. However, there was one house in the village that was different from the rest. It was old and decrepit, with windows boarded up and overgrown with vines. No one dared to go near it, as the villagers believed that it was haunted. One day, a young couple decided to move into the abandoned house, despite the warnings of the villagers. They were determined to make the house their own, and they worked tirelessly to renovate it. However, strange things started to happen soon after they moved in. They would hear strange noises in the middle of the night, and they often felt like they were being watched. One day, the wife went into the basement to do laundry, and she never came back up. Her husband searched the house and the surrounding area, but she was nowhere to be found. The villagers were shocked, and they feared that the wife had fallen victim to the ghostly presence that haunted the house. Days turned into weeks, and the husband became more and more desperate to find his wife. He spent all his time searching for her, and he refused to leave the house. The villagers tried to convince him to leave, but he wouldn't listen. One night, the husband heard a noise coming from the basement. He cautiously made his way down the stairs, and there he saw his wife, standing in the middle of the room. But something was different about her. Her eyes were empty and her skin was deathly pale. The husband was shocked, and he tried to approach her, but she suddenly lunged at him. It was then that the husband realized that his wife had been possessed by the ghostly presence that haunted the house. He screamed in terror and ran out of the house, never to return. The villagers tried to enter the house to help, but they were unable to do so. The house remains abandoned to this day, and the villagers still fear the ghostly presence that haunts it. Years later, a group of brave adventurers decided to explore the abandoned house. They entered the basement and found the husband, who had been locked in a perpetual state of terror. He was still alive, but he was unable to speak or move. The adventurers tried to help him, but it was too late. The ghostly presence had claimed another victim. Detective James was a seasoned cop who had seen it all. He was known for his courage and his unwavering determination to solve even the most difficult cases. But one call would change his life forever. It was a dark and stormy night when Detective James received a call from a frantic woman. She claimed that she was being stalked by a strange figure that was following her every move. Despite the late hour and the treacherous conditions, Detective James agreed to take the call. When he arrived at the woman's house, he was greeted by a sense of unease. The woman was visibly shaken, and she told Detective James that she had been seeing the same figure for weeks. She described it as a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes. Detective James didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural beings, but he could see the fear in the woman's eyes, and he decided to investigate. He searched the surrounding area, but he couldn't find any trace of the figure. Just as he was about to give up, he heard a strange sound coming from the woods. He cautiously approached the source of the sound, and there he saw the figure, a tall, dark being with glowing red eyes. Detective James was frozen with fear, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Just as he was about to turn and run, the figure suddenly disappeared, leaving behind a trail of smoke. Detective James couldn't explain what he had just seen, but he knew that he was dealing with something far beyond his understanding. He tried to tell others about the figure, but no one believed him. He was soon consumed by fear and paranoia, and he became obsessed with finding the truth about the figure. Years passed, and Detective James never found any answers. He was eventually transferred to another department, but he never forgot about the strange figure that he had encountered. To this day, he is still haunted by the memory of that dark, stormy night, and he wonders if he will ever find the answers that have eluded him for so long. The man stumbled through the dark, damp streets of the city, his vision blurry from the alcohol he had consumed. He was lost, and he had no idea how he had ended up in this part of town. As he stumbled forward, he suddenly found himself falling, tumbling down a steep incline into the foul-smelling darkness below. He hit the ground hard, his breath knocked out of him. Dazed, he looked around and realized that he was in the city's sewer system. He tried to find a way out, but it was difficult in the darkness. Every turn he took seemed to lead him further into the maze of pipes and tunnels. He could hear strange noises all around him, the drip of water echoing in the distance, the scurrying of rats in the shadows. He was filled with a sense of unease and fear. As he stumbled forward, he suddenly heard a low growl. He froze, his heart racing. The growl grew louder, and he realized that it was getting closer. He tried to run, but his drunken legs wouldn't obey him. He stumbled and fell, hitting his head on a pipe. When he came to, he was no longer alone in the sewers. A hulking, shadowy figure loomed over him, its eyes glowing in the darkness. The man tried to scream, but no sound would come out. He was paralyzed with fear as the creature advanced on him, its claws extended. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The man was alone once again in the dark, damp sewers. He lay there for what felt like hours, too scared to move. When he finally mustered up the courage to get up, he found that he was no longer lost. He was somehow back on the streets, and the sun was rising. He never spoke of what had happened to him in the sewers. Some say that he was never the same after that night, that he was haunted by the memory of the creature that had confronted him. Others say that he simply stumbled upon a doorway to a different dimension, and that he was lucky to have escaped with his life. But one thing is certain, no one ever entered the city's sewer system after dark again, for fear of encountering the mysterious, terrifying creature that haunted its dark tunnels. There was a small town located deep in the forest, surrounded by tall trees and thick fog. The town was known for its mysterious disappearances and strange noises that echoed throughout the night. One day, a young couple decided to hike into the forest to explore its beauty and eerie charm. They walked for hours, taking in the breathtaking scenery, when they stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin. The couple was fascinated by the cabin and decided to take a closer look. As they approached the cabin, they noticed that the door was slightly ajar. The couple cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cabin was empty and quiet, with only the sound of their footsteps echoing through the halls. But as they continued deeper into the cabin, they noticed something strange. The walls were covered in disturbing drawings and writings, describing horrific scenes of death and bloodshed. Suddenly, the couple heard a low growl coming from the shadows. They froze in fear as a large, hulking figure emerged from the darkness. It had glowing eyes, razor-sharp claws, and a mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech and lunged at the couple. The couple managed to escape and ran as fast as they could through the forest. But they soon realized that they were being pursued by the creature. They could hear its footsteps getting closer and closer, and the growling getting louder and louder. Just when they thought they had lost the creature, they stumbled upon a clearing in the forest. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone monument, with the words "You should not have come here" etched into the surface. The couple turned to run, but the creature had already caught up to them. They screamed as the creature attacked, but their screams were cut short as it devoured them whole. To this day, no one knows what became of the couple or what kind of monster resides in the abandoned cabin in the heart of the forest. But those who dare to venture into the forest speak of strange noises and mysterious disappearances, and some say that the creature is still out there, waiting for its next victim. It was a typical night for the worker, who was closing up a store after a long day. The store was located in a quiet shopping center, surrounded by empty parking lots and tall trees. The worker was used to working late and was always cautious when leaving the store, making sure to lock the doors and windows securely behind them. But tonight was different. As the worker walked through the aisles, turning off the lights and making their way to the front door, they felt a sense of unease. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they reached the front door, they noticed that one of the windows was slightly open. The worker was certain they had closed all the windows before leaving the store. They cautiously approached the window and peered outside, but all they could see was darkness. Suddenly, a hand reached through the window and grabbed the worker's shoulder. The worker screamed and spun around, but there was no one there. The hand seemed to have come out of nowhere. The worker tried to run, but their legs felt heavy and sluggish, as if they were moving through molasses. They made it to the front door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The worker was trapped. They heard a soft whisper coming from the shadows, saying you should have left when you had a chance. The worker turned around and saw a figure slowly emerging from the darkness, with glowing eyes and a sinister smile. The worker screamed for help, but their voice was barely a whisper. The figure approached slowly, until the worker could see its face. It was a twisted, demonic version of their own reflection. The worker tried to fight back, but the figure was too strong. It lunged forward and consumed the worker whole, leaving no trace behind. The next morning, the store was found still locked and secure, with all the lights turned off. The worker was never seen or heard from again. Some say that their ghost still haunts the store, warning others to leave before it's too late. There was a man who always felt like something was off in the world. No matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that reality was not what it seemed. One day, he stumbled upon a strange website that claimed to offer proof of a glitch in the Matrix. The site was filled with strange videos and cryptic messages, but the man was drawn to it, as if it held the answers he had been searching for. The man started to notice strange things happening around him. Objects would move on their own, and he would see shadows moving in the corners of his eyes, even though there was no one there. One night, as he was lying in bed, he suddenly found himself in a different place. It was a dark, eerie world, filled with strange, twisted creatures. The man realized that he was in a parallel universe, where reality was completely different from the one he knew. The man tried to find a way back to his own reality, but the more he searched, the more lost he became. He was trapped in the parallel universe, with no way out. As the days went by, the man started to experience more and more glitches in the Matrix. He would randomly find himself in different places, with no memory of how he got there. He was tormented by strange visions and haunted by the twisted creatures that dwelled in the parallel universe. The man was slowly losing his grip on reality. He was consumed by the glitch in the Matrix, until he was no longer sure what was real and what was not. To this day, the man is still lost in the parallel universe, trapped in the glitch in the Matrix, never to return to the reality he once knew. There was a small, isolated village in the middle of a dense forest. The villagers lived simple lives, surrounded by nature and free from the worries of the modern world. But there was a dark secret hidden in the forest. A monster lived there, preying on the villagers and terrorizing them for generations. The monster was said to be a shapeshifter, able to take on any form it desired, and was impossible to kill. One day, a young woman from the village disappeared without a trace. The villagers searched the forest for days, but there was no sign of her. A few weeks later, the woman returned to the village, but she was not the same. Her eyes were blank and her movements were mechanical, as if she was controlled by an unseen force. The villagers soon realized that the monster had taken her and was now using her as a vessel to move among them, undetected. The villagers tried to banish the monster, but it was too powerful. They turned to a wise old sage who lived on the outskirts of the village. The sage told them that the monster could only be defeated by someone pure of heart, who was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. A young man from the village stepped forward, offering to be the sacrifice. The sage prepared him for the task, teaching him ancient spells and incantations to use against the monster. The young man entered the forest, and after a long and grueling battle, he was finally able to defeat the monster and restore the woman to her true self. But as he made his way back to the village, he realized that he had been changed by the battle. He was no longer human, but had become a monster himself, cursed to roam the forest for eternity, preying on the innocent. The villagers never saw the young man again, but they always remembered his sacrifice and told his story to each new generation, as a warning to never underestimate the power of the monster that lurked in the forest. There was a small, isolated village in the middle of a dense forest. The villagers lived simple lives, surrounded by nature and free from the worries of the modern world. But there was a dark secret hidden in the forest. A monster lived there, preying on the villagers and terrorizing them for generations. The monster was said to be a shapeshifter, able to take on any form it desired, and was impossible to kill. One day, a young woman from the village disappeared without a trace. The villagers searched the forest for days, but there was no sign of her. A few weeks later, the woman returned to the village, but she was not the same. Her eyes were blank and her movements were mechanical, as if she was controlled by an unseen force. The villagers soon realized that the monster had taken her and was now using her as a vessel to move among them, undetected. The villagers tried to banish the monster, but it was too powerful. They turned to a wise old sage who lived on the outskirts of the village. The sage told them that the monster could only be defeated by someone pure of heart, who was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. A young man from the village stepped forward, offering to be the sacrifice. The sage prepared him for the task, teaching him ancient spells and incantations to use against the monster. The young man entered the forest, and after a long and grueling battle, he was finally able to defeat the monster and restore the woman to her true self. But as he made his way back to the village, he realized that he had been changed by the battle. He was no longer human, but had become a monster himself, cursed to roam the forest for eternity, preying on the innocent. The villagers never saw the young man again, but they always remembered his sacrifice and told his story to each new generation, as a warning to never underestimate the power of the monster that lurked in the forest. The winds were howling and the rain was coming down in sheets as a man found himself lost in the midst of a raging hurricane. He had been driving home from a business trip when he suddenly found himself caught in the storm and unable to find his way back to the main road. As he drove through the desolate countryside, he noticed that the winds were getting stronger and the rain was coming down harder. He could barely see the road in front of him and he was afraid that he would crash or get stuck in a ditch. Suddenly, his car came to a stop and he realized that he had run out of gas. The man tried to call for help on his cell phone, but there was no signal. He was completely isolated, with no way to call for help and no way to escape the fury of the storm. The man took shelter in an old abandoned barn, but the winds were so strong that he was afraid the roof would collapse at any moment. He huddled in a corner, shivering from the cold and the fear of what might happen to him. As the night wore on, the man heard strange noises coming from outside the barn. He couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else, but it was a haunting and eerie sound that filled him with dread. He realized that he was not alone in the storm, and that something was watching him from the darkness. The man spent a sleepless and terrifying night in the barn, waiting for the storm to pass and praying for help to arrive. When the sun finally rose and the storm began to subside, he stumbled out of the barn, only to find that he was completely lost and had no idea where he was. To this day, no one knows what happened to the man. Some say that he was never seen again, while others claim that he was never truly alone in the storm and that something followed him out of the darkness. But one thing is for certain, the experience left him changed forever, haunted by the memories of his terrifying night lost in the hurricane. The night was dark and the clouds were thick as the pilot took off from the airport, heading towards his destination. He had been flying for years and had seen it all, but tonight was different. Something felt off, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he flew through the sky, he suddenly saw strange lights appearing in the clouds. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but as he got closer, he realized that the lights were not natural. They were ghostly and ethereal, floating in the air with no apparent source. The pilot tried to ignore the lights and focus on his flight, but they seemed to be getting closer and closer. He tried to communicate with air traffic control, but there was no response. He was completely alone in the sky with these mysterious and haunting lights. As he flew deeper into the clouds, he saw that the lights had taken on a more sinister form. They were no longer just lights, but ghostly figures, floating in the air and following his every move. The pilot felt a cold fear grip at his heart as he realized that he was flying through a sky filled with ghosts. Despite his fear, he kept flying, determined to reach his destination. But the ghosts seemed to be getting more and more agitated, and the pilot was suddenly enveloped in a cloud of fog. When the fog cleared, he found that he was no longer flying through the sky, but instead was hovering above a strange and eerie landscape. The pilot was never seen or heard from again, and no one knows what happened to him or his plane. Some say that he was lost in a world between life and death, flying through the skies with the ghosts forever. Others claim that he was taken by the spirits of the sky and was never seen again. But one thing is for certain, the pilot's flight remains a mystery to this day, and a haunting reminder of the dangers of flying through the sky with ghosts. It was just another ordinary day at the meatpacking plant, and the workers were going about their duties, preparing the daily shipments of meat. But for one worker, their routine was about to take a terrifying turn. As they entered the massive freezer to retrieve a shipment of meat, the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. At first, they tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped, with no way to escape a freezing cold. As the minutes ticked by, the workers' fear only grew. The temperature was dropping quickly, and they were shivering uncontrollably. Just when they thought they couldn't take it anymore, they heard a strange noise coming from the back of the freezer. It was a low, raspy breathing, and it was getting closer. The worker tried to hide, but it was no use. The creature, a hulking mass of ice and frost, slowly emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The worker screamed and backed up against the wall, but the creature was too fast. It grabbed the worker with its icy grip and dragged them into the darkness, where they were never seen or heard from again. The next day, when the other workers finally found the door to the freezer open, they went inside to investigate. But all they found was a chilling silence, and no sign of the missing worker. To this day, no one knows what happened to them, and the incident remains shrouded in mystery and fear. It was a quiet night and the pizza delivery person was making their rounds, delivering piping hot pizzas to customers all over town. As they pulled up to the address of their next delivery, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The house was dark and quiet, and the only sound was the wind blowing through the trees. The delivery person hesitantly approached the door and rang the bell, but there was no answer. They tried again, but still no response. Just as they were about to leave, they heard a faint sound coming from inside the house. It was a low, guttural growl, and it sent chills down their spine. Despite their fear, they pushed open the door and stepped inside. The house was dark and silent, but they could sense something was off. Suddenly, they heard the growl again, this time much closer. They spun around and saw a figure emerging from the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dark. The delivery person tried to make a run for it, but the figure was too fast. They grabbed the delivery person by the arm and pulled them into the shadows, where they were surrounded by a horde of other creatures, all growling and snarling. The delivery person was never seen or heard from again, and the only evidence of their fate was the half-eaten pizza that was found on the front porch of the house the next morning. To this day, locals tell stories of a creepy customer who lures unsuspecting delivery people into their lair, never to be seen again. The house remains abandoned, a dark and ominous reminder of the dangers of delivering pizza to the unknown. The hunter was an experienced outdoorsman, who had been tracking and hunting game in these woods for years. But this time was different. As he made his way deeper into the forest, he felt an uneasiness he had never felt before. The leaves rustled and the branches creaked, but there was no wind. The birds had stopped singing, and the only sounds were the hunter's footsteps. But then, he heard something else, a low growl, coming from up ahead. The hunter drew his rifle, and slowly approached the source of the sound. He peeked around a tree and saw a figure, shrouded in darkness. It was massive, with fur as black as coal and eyes that glowed red. The hunter aimed his rifle, but the figure was too quick. It pounced on him, knocking the rifle from his hands. The hunter struggled to get away, but the creature was too strong. It lifted him into the air, and the hunter felt its hot breath on his face. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the creature was gone, leaving the hunter lying on the ground, badly shaken. He stumbled back to his camp, but he never ventured into those woods again. Years later, the hunter heard whispers of strange creatures in the forest, and he knew that he had come face to face with something beyond his wildest nightmares. And to this day, no one knows what truly lurks in the heart of those woods, and those who dare to venture too deep are never seen or heard from again. In the quiet of night, when the world was asleep, a giant dragon descended from the stars. It was a sight that no one had ever seen before, and the people were filled with terror and awe. The dragon was the size of a mountain, and its scales shone with an otherworldly light. Its eyes glowed like fiery orbs, and its breath was a torrent of flames. The ground shook as it landed, and the sky was lit up with its arrival. The people ran for their lives, seeking shelter from the monster that had come from the stars. But there was nowhere to hide. nowhere to run. The dragon was everywhere, its roar echoing across the land. For days and nights, the dragon rampaged through the countryside, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Cities were burned to the ground, and entire civilizations were reduced to ashes. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the dragon vanished back into the stars. The world was left to pick up the pieces, wondering if the monster would ever return. Years passed, and people slowly started to rebuild their lives. But every now and then, on a quiet night, they could still hear the distant roar of the dragon, reminding them of the terror that had once come from the stars. The Johnson family lived in a remote cabin in the woods, far from civilization. They were self-sufficient, growing their own food and relying on themselves for protection. They loved their solitude, but as winter approached, they started to feel the isolation more acutely. One night, as the wind howled outside and snow piled up against the windows, the family heard a strange noise outside. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but as the sound grew louder and more persistent, they realized it was something else. They cautiously opened the door to find a pack of wolves, their eyes shining in the moonlight. The wolves circled the cabin, growling and snarling, as the family realized they were surrounded. The family tried to defend themselves, but they were no match for the wolves. The creatures broke into the cabin, their teeth and claws tearing through the wood as if it were paper. The family was overcome, one by one, until only a single survivor remained. That person huddled in a corner, listening into the wolves feasting on the bodies of their loved ones. They knew that they were next, and there was nowhere to run. The wolves were in control now, and the cabin in the woods was their domain. As the person closed their eyes, waiting for the end, they could still hear the howling of the wolves outside. And they knew that the pack would never stop hunting, never stop feasting, until there was nothing left. Once upon a time, there was a truck driver named Jack who was driving his rig through the mountains late at night. The road was treacherous, with sharp turns and steep drops, but Jack was a seasoned veteran and felt confident in his abilities. However, as he rounded a particularly sharp bend, he suddenly heard a loud pop from one of his tires. The truck began to fishtail, and Jack fought to regain control, but it was no use. The truck went careening off the edge of the mountain, tumbling down the rocky cliffside. Jack was thrown from the cab and blacked out as he hit the ground. When he came to, he was lying in a bed of rocks and dirt, his body battered and broken. The truck was nowhere to be seen, having plummeted even further down the cliff. Dazed and in pain, Jack tried to stand, but found that his leg was badly injured and he couldn't put any weight on it. He was stuck in the wilderness, with no way to call for help and no food or water. As the hours passed, Jack's desperation grew. He was lost in the wilderness with no hope of rescue. The moon rose high in the sky and strange sounds filled the night air, spurring Jack's imagination with all sorts of frightening possibilities. Just as he was about to lose all hope, he heard the sound of a helicopter overhead. He hobbled to his feet and began waving his arms, hoping to get the attention of the pilot. To his immense relief, the helicopter saw him and lowered a rescue team to his location. Thanks to the quick thinking and bravery of the rescue team, Jack was rescued and taken to safety. Though he was battered and broken, he was alive and grateful to have survived such a harrowing experience. From that day on, Jack never drove through the mountains at night again, and instead chose to stick to well-lit, well-traveled roads. He always looked back on his accident as a wake-up call, a reminder that anything can happen on the road and that he needed to be prepared for anything. There was once a seasoned hunter named Jack who lived in the deep forests of the Northern Territories. He was known for his bravery and hunting skills, and had never failed to bring back his prey from the forests. But one day, he took on a challenge that would change his life forever. Jack heard about a pack of wolves that had been terrorizing the nearby villages and decided to hunt them down. He was warned by the villagers about the pack's ferocity and cunning, but Jack was not one to back down from a challenge. So, he set out into the forest with his trusty hunting rifle and a backpack full of supplies. As he made his way deeper into the forest, Jack began to feel a sense of unease. The forest was eerily quiet, and not a single bird chirped or animal rustled in the bushes. Suddenly, he heard the howl of a wolf in the distance. Jack's heart began to race, but he tried to remain calm. He reloaded his rifle and continued forward, his senses on high alert. The howling grew louder and closer, and Jack realized that he was surrounded by the pack of wolves. They circled him, baring their teeth and growling fiercely. Jack's heart was pounding, but he stood his ground and aimed his rifle at the closest wolf. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, the largest and most imposing wolf among the pack stepped forward. It stared into Jack's eyes and let out a deafening howl. Jack could feel the power of the wolf, and for a moment, he was paralyzed with fear. But then, he remembered why he was there and why he had to do this. He took a deep breath and pulled the trigger, taking down the alpha wolf with one shot. The rest of the pack let out a mournful howl and scattered into the forest. Jack continued to hunt the pack for several days, until there were no more wolves left to terrorize the villages. He returned to the village as a hero, and the villagers thanked him for his bravery. From that day on, Jack was known as the hunter who overcame a pack of wolves. However, some say that on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, you can still hear the howls of the wolves echoing through the forests, reminding Jack and all who listen of the terror he faced and conquered. In a small village in ancient times, there was a towering statue that stood on the outskirts of the village. It was a statue of the village's protector deity and was said to bring good luck and prosperity to the villagers. But one day, everything changed. It was a dark and stormy night, and the villagers were huddled inside their homes as the winds howled and the rain beat against the roofs. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise coming from outside. They cautiously opened their doors to find that the statue had come to life and was attacking the village. The statue was massive, easily towering over the tallest buildings, and its stone arms were crushing homes and destroying everything in its path. The villagers were in a state of panic as they ran for their lives. The village leaders, who were said to have the power to communicate with the deity, tried to appease the statue by offering offerings and performing rituals. But nothing seemed to stop the statue's rampage. Days went by, and the statue showed no signs of stopping. The village was in ruins, and many lives were lost. Desperate for a solution, the village leaders decided to consult the wisest and oldest among them, a sage who lived in the nearby mountains. The sage listened to their plea and told them the story of a powerful sorcerer who had created the statue as a weapon of destruction. The sorcerer had imbued the statue with magic, so that it would come to life and attack the village if the sorcerer's enemies ever tried to take over the village. The sage also told the village leaders that the only way to stop the statue was to destroy the source of the magic, the sorcerer's enchanted staff, which was hidden deep within the statue's base. The village leaders, along with a brave and determined group of warriors, set out on a dangerous journey to the statue's base. They fought their way past the statue's defenses and finally reached the sorcerer's staff. With one final blow, the staff was destroyed, and the statue crumbled to the ground, the magic that brought it to life forever gone. The village was saved, but the memory of the statue's attack was never forgotten. It was passed down from generation to generation, serving as a warning to all of the power and danger that magic can bring. There was once a person named Sarah who lived a quiet life in a small town. She was a kind and gentle soul, always ready to help others in need. But one day, her life took a dark turn. Sarah started to receive threatening messages, but the strangest part was that they came from voices she couldn't see. At first, she thought it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But as the messages became more frequent and the voices more sinister, she knew that something was terribly wrong. The voices whispered to her at night, when she was all alone, promising to do her harm if she didn't do as they commanded. Sarah tried to ignore them, thinking that if she didn't respond they would go away. But they only grew louder and more persistent. One day, Sarah received a message that told her to go to the old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. She knew she shouldn't go, but the voices were so persuasive that she couldn't resist. When she arrived at the mansion, she was met with a horrifying sight. The walls were covered in cryptic symbols, and the air was thick with the whispers of the voices. Sarah felt as if she was being watched, and she had the unmistakable feeling that she was not alone. She tried to leave, but the doors were locked, and the windows wouldn't budge. The voices grew louder and more menacing, and Sarah realized that she was trapped. She was in the grasp of some dark force, and it seemed that there was no escape. Just as she thought all was lost, she heard a voice that was different from the others. It was a voice of kindness, urging her to hold on and to never give up hope. With renewed determination, Sarah fought against the dark force, using the strength of her own will to break free. She stumbled out of the mansion, gasping for air, and ran back to the safety of her home. From that day on, she never heard from the voices again. But she never forgot the fear that they brought, and the lessons she learned about the power of the human spirit. There was once a man named Thomas who lived in a small city. No one really knew much about him, but he was known for his obsession with sweets. He would spend hours in the candy aisle of the grocery store, carefully selecting his favorites. One day, Thomas disappeared from the city. Weeks passed, and people started finding small wrapped candies all over the place, in the park, on the sidewalk, and even on their front porch. At first, everyone was excited and grateful to find the free treats. But then, strange things started happening. People who ate the candy began feeling sick. Some had hallucinations, while others felt dizzy and disoriented. As the days passed, more and more people started to fall ill, and soon it became clear that something was wrong. Investigations revealed that the candy was laced with a deadly poison, and the man responsible was none other than Thomas. It turned out that he had a twisted fascination with sweets and wanted to see the effect the poison would have on people. The city was thrown into a state of panic as people frantically tried to find the source of the candy. Thomas had left poisoned treats all over the city, and it seemed like there was no end in sight. The police launched a manhunt for Thomas, but he was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Some say he was still out there, leaving poisoned candy for unsuspecting victims. Others say he was long gone, but his legacy lived on as a warning to always be careful of what you eat. The story of Thomas and his poisoned candy remains a frightening tale that is told to this day. People in the city still remember the terror that gripped their community, and they are always cautious when they see an unexpected treat left on the sidewalk. In a small village in ancient times, there was a towering statue that stood on the outskirts of the village. It was a statue of the village's protector deity and was said to bring good luck and prosperity to the villagers. But one day, everything changed. It was a dark and stormy night, and the villagers were huddled inside their homes as the winds howled and the rain beat against the roofs. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise coming from outside. They cautiously opened their doors to find that the statue had come to life and was attacking the village. The statue was massive, easily towering over the tallest buildings, and its stone arms were crushing homes and destroying everything in its path. The villagers were in a state of panic as they ran for their lives. The village leaders, who were said to have the power to communicate with the deity, tried to appease the statue by offering offerings and performing rituals. But nothing seemed to stop the statue's rampage. Days went by, and the statue showed no signs of stopping. The village was in ruins, and many lives were lost. Desperate for a solution, the village leaders decided to consult the wisest and oldest among them, the sage who lived in the nearby mountains. The sage listened to their plea and told them the story of a powerful sorcerer who had created the statue as a weapon of destruction. The sorcerer had imbued the statue with magic, so that it would come to life and attack the village if the sorcerer's enemies ever tried to take over the village. The sage also told the village leaders that the only way to stop the statue was to destroy the source of the magic, the sorcerer's enchanted staff, which was hidden deep within the statue's base. The village leaders, along with a brave and determined group of warriors, set out on a dangerous journey to the statue's base. They fought their way past the statue's defenses and finally reached the sorcerer's staff. With one final blow, the staff was destroyed, and the statue crumbled to the ground, the magic that brought it to life forever gone. The village was saved, but the memory of the statue's attack was never forgotten. It was passed down from generation to generation, serving as a warning to all of the power and danger that magic can bring. There was once a small village that was plagued by a mysterious illness. People would fall ill suddenly, and within days, they would die with no explanation. Fear spread through the village, and no one knew what was causing the illness or how to stop it. One day, a stranger came to the village, claiming to be a healer. He said that he could cure the illness and put an end to the villagers' suffering. The people were desperate, and they welcomed the stranger with open arms. The stranger went to work, visiting the sick and administering his treatments. At first, people started to get better, and hope returned to the village. But as time passed, strange things started to happen. People would disappear in the night, never to be seen again. And the stranger was always there, watching, with a sinister smile on his face. The villagers realized too late that the stranger was not a healer at all, but a dark being who had come to feed on their fear and suffering. They tried to drive him out of the village, but he was too powerful. The villagers were trapped in a never-ending cycle of illness and death, with no escape from the monster in their midst. From that day on, the village was forever cursed, and the monster continued to feed on the fear and suffering of those who lived there. The villagers tell the story to this day, warning others never to let a stranger enter their village, for fear of inviting the same fate. There was once a family who lived in a remote cabin deep in the forest. They were happy and content, enjoying the peace and solitude of their forest home. But one day, strange things started to happen. At night, they would hear strange noises coming from outside their cabin. They would see shadows moving in the trees, and they felt as if they were being watched. The family tried to ignore the strange happenings, thinking that they were just their imagination playing tricks on them. But the strange occurrences only grew more frequent and more intense. The family started to see ghostly apparitions, and they felt as if they were being stalked by something sinister. They were filled with fear, and they didn't know what to do. One night, the family was awakened by a loud banging on the door. When they opened it, they were confronted by a figure shrouded in darkness. It was a shadowy figure, with no face or form, and it seemed to be made entirely of shadows. The family was paralyzed with fear, and they could feel the cold touch of the shadow figure on their skin. It whispered to them in a voice that was both chilling and seductive, promising to take them to a place of peace and comfort. The family was torn. They were filled with fear, but at the same time, they were drawn to the figure and its promises. In the end, they followed the shadow figure into the darkness, never to be seen again. To this day, the forest is haunted by the ghostly apparitions of the family, and the shadow figure still wanders the forest, seeking new victims to take into the darkness. Those who dare to enter the forest tell of feeling watched, and they whisper of a sinister presence lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next prey. There was once a lone gunman named Ethan who lived a life on the run. He was a mercenary for hire, taking on dangerous jobs that no one else dared to do. But one day, he took on a job that would change his life forever. Ethan was hired to protect a wealthy businessman from an unknown assassin. The businessman claimed that the assassin was like nothing he had ever seen before, an entity made of shadows that could appear anywhere at any time. Ethan was skeptical, but the pay was too good to pass up. At first, everything seemed normal. Ethan guarded the businessman and made sure that he was safe. But on the third night of the job, Ethan was awoken by a chilling feeling, as if someone was watching him. He quickly grabbed his gun and searched the room, but found no one. That's when it started. The entity made of shadows began to attack. It would appear suddenly, its dark form striking at Ethan from all directions. Ethan was a skilled gunman, but he was no match for this thing. It was like trying to hit a shadow. Ethan was on the run, trying to find a way to escape the entity's grasp. He locked himself in a room, but the entity found a way in. Ethan was surrounded, with no escape in sight. Just as the entity was about to strike, Ethan remembered a trick he had learned in his mercenary days. He shot a bullet into a nearby mirror, shattering it. The shards of glass reflected the entity's shadow form, making it visible for just a moment. In that moment, Ethan was able to take aim and fire a shot that shattered the entity's shadow form, destroying it for good. Barely alive and covered in cuts from the shards of glass, Ethan stumbled out of the building and disappeared into the night, never to take on a job like that again. From that day on, he was known as the lone gunman who survived an attack by the assassin made of shadows. But he would never forget the fear that the entity brought, and he would always be looking over his shoulder, wondering when the shadows would come for him again. In the small town of Willow Creek, the full moon was always a source of fear. It was said that on nights when the moon was full, strange things would happen, and people would go missing. One night, a young couple decided to go for a walk in the woods near the town. As they walked, they noticed that the moon was full and bright, casting an eerie glow over the trees. Suddenly, the couple heard a howl in the distance, a howl unlike any they had ever heard before. It was a howl that chilled them to the bone, and they started to run back to town. But the howling continued, getting louder and closer. The couple was soon surrounded by a pack of wolves, their eyes glowing with a supernatural light. The couple realized too late that the wolves were not normal, but were controlled by the full moon, which seemed to have a life of its own. The couple never returned from that walk, and the townspeople whispered that they had been taken by the moon. To this day, the people of Willow Creek still fear the full moon and the strange things it brings. There was a small town that was plagued by a series of strange disappearances. People would vanish without a trace, and no one knew what was happening to them. The town was so desperate for answers that they hired a famous private investigator to solve the case. The investigator soon discovered that all of the missing people had one thing in common: they had all recently called a plumber to fix a leak in their homes. The investigator decided to pose as a homeowner in need of a plumber, and arranged for the same plumber to come to his home. When the plumber arrived, the investigator was shocked to find that he was an elderly man with a sinister-looking grin. As the plumber worked on the fake leak, the investigator noticed that he was muttering strange incantations under his breath. Suddenly, the floor beneath the investigator gave way and he fell into a dark, damp basement. The plumber appeared at the top of the stairs, cackling maniacally, and the investigator realized that he was a practitioner of dark magic. The plumber used his magic to trap the investigator in the basement, and the investigator was never seen or heard from again. The townspeople soon realized that the plumber was behind the disappearances, and they banded together to capture him. But when they finally caught the plumber, they found that he was no longer an elderly man, but a grotesque, supernatural creature that defied explanation. They destroyed the creature, but the town was never quite the same after that. People whispered that the plumber's ghost still haunted the town, and that those who entered his basement never returned. There was once a family who lived in a large, old house in the countryside. The house was said to be haunted, but the family didn't believe in ghosts and thought it was just a silly rumor. One night, as the family was getting ready for bed, they heard strange noises coming from the attic. They ignored it at first, but the noises persisted, growing louder and more disturbing. Finally, they decided to investigate. As they climbed the stairs to the attic, they felt a growing sense of unease. When they finally reached the top of the stairs, they were greeted by a scene from their worst nightmares. The attic was filled with ghostly figures, their eyes glowing in the dark. The family was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. And then, the ghosts began to approach them, their hands outstretched. The family screamed and ran back down the stairs, but the ghosts were right behind them. They were trapped, with no escape from the ghostly horde that was pursuing them. As the family cowered in fear, they suddenly heard a voice from the shadows. It was the ghost of a previous owner of the house, who had been trapped in the attic for years. The ghost told them that they could break the curse by finding a hidden key that would unlock the door to the outside world. The family searched the house frantically, but they couldn't find the key. And so, they remained trapped in the haunted house forever, forced to live out their days in terror. There was a mysterious antique shop in the heart of the city that sold all kinds of strange and unusual items. One of its most popular items was an old, ornate mirror that was said to hold a dark secret. People who looked into the mirror claimed to see strange and frightening things, and some even claimed that it had taken them to another dimension. The shopkeeper warned that those who entered the other dimension through the mirror would never be able to return, unless they knew the secret way back. Despite the warnings, many people were still drawn to the mirror, and some even claimed to have entered the other dimension and returned safely. So a group of friends, curious and adventurous, decided to test their luck and look into the mirror. As they gazed into the glass, they saw a strange and frightening world that was like nothing they had ever seen before. The sky was a sickly green color, the trees were twisted and black, and the creatures that roamed the land were unlike anything they had ever seen. The friends quickly realized that they were in trouble, and that they needed to find a way back to their own world. But no matter how hard they searched, they couldn't find a way out. They were trapped in this strange and frightening world, with no hope of escape. Just as they were about to give up hope, they stumbled upon an old, mysterious tome that held the secret of how to return to their own world. The tome told them that the only way back was to recite a secret incantation in front of the mirror. and to believe with all their hearts that they could return. The friends hesitated at first, but with no other options left, they recited the incantation and closed their eyes tightly. When they opened their eyes, they were back in the antique shop, in front of the mirror. They were relieved and grateful to be back, but they were also filled with a deep sense of unease. They knew that the other dimension was still out there, waiting for its next victim. From that day on, the friends warned others not to look into the mirror, no matter how tempted they were. But every now and then, someone would still be drawn to the dark secret that lay within the glass, and they would disappear into the other dimension, never to return. The mirror still hangs in the antique shop to this day, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk just beyond the veil of reality. There was once a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other and crime was almost non-existent. But that all changed when a wealthy businessman was found dead in his home. The police declared it a suicide, but some of the townspeople had their doubts. The businessman had been a well-liked and respected member of the community, and many found it hard to believe that he would take his own life. So a group of concerned citizens decided to investigate the case on their own. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a web of lies and deceit. They discovered that the businessman had a secret, dark side that he kept hidden from the world. He was involved in illegal activities and had made many enemies. The citizens were convinced that the businessman had been murdered, but the police wouldn't listen. They were certain that it was a suicide, and they weren't interested in reopening the case. So the citizens took matters into their own hands. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and pieced together the events of that fateful night. And finally, they found the murderer, the businessman's business partner, who had motive, means, and opportunity to kill him. But when they took their findings to the police, they were met with disbelief. The police still believed that it was a suicide, and they refused to arrest the murderer. So the citizens took the murderer to court, and after a long and grueling trial, they finally won. The murderer was found guilty and sent to prison, and the truth about the businessman's death was finally revealed. There was a small, secluded cabin deep in the woods that was said to be haunted by the ghost of a woman who had died there many years before. Despite the rumors, a group of friends decided to spend a weekend at the cabin to see if they could find any evidence of the ghost. The first night at the cabin was uneventful, but as the night went on, strange things started to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own, strange noises echoed through the cabin, and the friends started to feel like they were being watched. One of the friends, a paranormal investigator, was determined to capture evidence of the ghost and set up a series of cameras and other recording devices throughout the cabin. But when they reviewed the footage the next day, they found nothing out of the ordinary. Frustrated and scared, the friends decided to leave the cabin and head back to the city. But as they were packing their things, they discovered that one of their friends was missing. Despite a thorough search of the cabin and surrounding woods, they couldn't find any sign of their missing friend. Days turned into weeks, and the friends never heard from their missing friend again. The police investigated, but they could find no evidence of foul play and the case went cold. Years later, one of the friends stumbled upon a box in an attic that contained all of the recordings and footage from their weekend at the cabin. As they watched the footage, they noticed something strange. In one of the recordings, they could see the ghost of the woman who was said to haunt the cabin. But even more shocking, the ghost was holding the hand of their missing friend, leading them away from the cabin and into the woods. The friend was horrified and realized a shocking truth: their missing friend was not a victim, but had actually been the ghost all along. The ghost of the woman had found someone to keep her company in death, and had led them away from the cabin to keep them there forever. Samantha was home alone, enjoying a relaxing shower after a long day at work. She closed her eyes and let the warm water wash away the stress of the day. but suddenly, she heard a loud noise coming from her front door. Panicked, Samantha quickly turned off the shower and reached for a towel to wrap around herself. She cautiously made her way to the front door, but found that the intruder had already broken in. She could hear footsteps coming towards her, and she knew she was in grave danger. Samantha ran to her bedroom, locking the door behind her and grabbing her phone to call for help. She dialed her boyfriend's number, but he didn't answer. She tried calling 911, but the line was busy. She was trapped, with no one to turn to for help. Just as the intruder was about to break down her bedroom door, Samantha heard a loud noise coming from outside. It was her boyfriend, back from his trip and coming to her rescue. He had received her panicked voicemail and rushed home as quickly as he could. With a sense of relief, Samantha watched as her boyfriend kicked down the front door and overpowered the intruder. He saved her from a terrible fate, and held her tightly as she cried tears of gratitude and relief. From that moment on, Samantha knew that she would always be safe with her boyfriend by her side. And she vowed to never take a shower alone again, because you never know what might happen when you're home alone. John was a successful businessman, but he was haunted by a dark secret. An ancestral demon had been following him for as long as he could remember, tormenting him with nightmares and strange occurrences. He had tried everything to break the curse, but nothing seemed to work. One night, John had a particularly vivid nightmare where the demon appeared to him and revealed the source of the curse. It had been passed down from generation to generation, and could only be broken by a ritual that involved a specific artifact and a sacrifice. John was desperate to break the curse, so he set out on a journey to find the artifact. He traveled to remote villages and consulted with ancient scholars, piecing together the information he needed to complete a ritual. Finally, he found the artifact and made his way to a secluded location to perform the ritual. He made the necessary preparations and, with a heavy heart, made the sacrifice. To his shock, the demon appeared before him and, with a wicked grin, said, "You have broken the curse, but at what cost?" John realized too late that the sacrifice he had made was not an offering to the demon, but a part of himself. The demon disappeared, and John was left alone with the full weight of his actions. He felt a deep sense of regret, but also a sense of release. The curse had been broken, but at what cost? John vowed to never let anything like this happen again. He dedicated his life to studying the occult, determined to understand and protect himself from the forces of darkness. He never forgot the lesson he learned that day, that there is always a cost to breaking a curse, and sometimes the price is too high to pay. Samantha was on a hike in the woods with her friends when she came across an old, abandoned cabin. Being the adventurous type, she decided to explore the inside. As soon as she stepped inside, she was hit by a feeling of dread. The air was thick and heavy, and the world seemed to close in around her. Despite her friends' protests, she pressed on, drawn to the mysterious energy of the place. As she made her way deeper into the cabin, she found a room filled with strange markings and symbols. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror. Samantha couldn't resist the urge to look into the mirror, and as she gazed into it, she felt herself being pulled into a dark, alternate reality. She found herself in a world filled with terror and darkness, with creatures that seemed to exist only in her nightmares. She wandered aimlessly, trying to find a way back to reality. She came across a figure that looked like a wise old sage, who told her that the only way back was to solve a puzzle hidden within the alternate reality. Samantha worked tirelessly to solve the puzzle, but each time she thought she was close, she was drawn deeper into the alternate reality. She began to lose all hope, convinced that she was stuck there forever. Just when she thought it was all over, She solved the puzzle and was suddenly transported back to the abandoned cabin. She bolted from the place, never daring to look back. Samantha never spoke of her experience to anyone, but she was never the same after that day. She was haunted by the memory of the alternate reality, and the things she saw there. Some nights, she would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that she was being pulled back into the dark, terrifying world. John had always been a curious and imaginative person, but lately, his thoughts had started to take a dark turn. Everywhere he looked, he saw faces, faces in the walls, faces in the objects around him, faces in the food he ate. At first, he thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but as the days went by, the faces became more and more vivid and real. He started to feel like he was being watched, like the faces were following him everywhere he went. He became paranoid and fearful, and he stopped leaving his house. He was afraid that the faces would follow him outside and that they would never leave him alone. John tried to ignore the faces, but they only seemed to become more persistent. He started to see faces in his dreams as well, and they were always the same, twisted and grotesque, filled with a sense of malevolence. One day, John couldn't take it anymore. He took a knife and started to carve the faces out of the walls and objects around him, trying to banish them from his life. But as soon as he had finished carving one face, another would appear in its place. John became more and more disturbed, and he started to question his sanity. He couldn't understand why he was the only one who could see the faces, and why they were tormenting him. It wasn't until after John's death that the truth was finally revealed. The faces were the manifestation of an ancestral curse, passed down from generation to generation. The curse had claimed John as its latest victim, and it would continue to torment others unless it was broken. John's family discovered the ritual that would break the curse, but it required a sacrifice, the sacrifice of a life. And so, they decided to carry out the ritual, hoping to break the curse and bring peace to the tortured soul of John. But even after the ritual was performed, the faces continued to haunt John's family, appearing in their dreams and in their waking moments. They realized that the curse was not easily broken, and that it would continue to torment them for generations to come. In a small town, strange things started to happen. People were disappearing without a trace, and strange lights were seen in the sky at night. The townspeople were scared and didn't know what to do. One night, a group of teenagers decided to investigate the source of the strange lights. They found a crashed spaceship in the woods, and they approached it cautiously. As they got closer, they noticed that there were creatures inside the ship that didn't look like anything they had ever seen before. The creatures were tall, with elongated heads and large, black eyes. They seemed to be examining the ship's controls, as if they were trying to fix it. The teenagers were about to turn and run, but the creatures suddenly turned their attention to the group. The teenagers were paralyzed with fear as the creatures approached them. Suddenly, one of the creatures spoke in a strange, mechanical voice. "We come in peace," it said. "We need your help." The teenagers were shocked. They had never heard of aliens before, and they didn't know what to make of the situation. Despite their fear, they agreed to help the aliens repair their ship. As the days passed, the teenagers became more and more involved with the aliens. They learned that the aliens were from a distant planet and that they had been traveling through space for centuries. They also learned that their planet was in danger, and that they needed the help of the townspeople to save it. However, as the repairs to the alien ship progressed, strange things started to happen. People in the town started to act strangely, as if they were under the control of something else. The teenagers realized that the aliens weren't what they seemed, and that they had a sinister plan in mind. The teenagers tried to warn the townspeople, but they wouldn't listen. The aliens had taken control of their minds, and they were now working to help the aliens take over the planet. The teenagers were the only ones who could stop the aliens, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. As the aliens' plan reached its final stages, the teenagers realized that there was only one way to stop them. They sacrificed themselves to destroy the alien ship, putting an end to the alien threat once and for all. The town was saved, but at a great cost. The teenagers were hailed as heroes, but their sacrifice was never forgotten. To this day, their story is told as a cautionary tale of the dangers of the unknown. There was a family who lived in a remote cabin in the woods. The father, mother, and their 2 children lived a simple life, far away from the stresses of modern society. However, one day, their peaceful existence was shattered when they stumbled upon a mysterious stranger in the woods. The stranger was unlike anyone they had ever seen before. He was tall, with pale skin and piercing eyes. He claimed to be lost, and he begged the family for their help. The family was hesitant, but they felt sorry for the stranger and decided to take him in for the night. As the night progressed, the stranger began to act strange. He would mutter to himself and pace back and forth in his room. The family grew more and more uneasy, and they decided to ask the stranger to leave in the morning. However, when they went to the stranger's room, they found that he had disappeared. They searched the entire cabin, but there was no sign of him. The family was stunned and scared, but they assumed that the stranger had simply snuck out in the middle of the night. Days passed, and the family tried to put the strange encounter behind them. But they soon realized that they were being watched. They would see the stranger's piercing eyes in the shadows, and they would hear strange whispers in the night. The family was scared, but they didn't know what to do. One night, the family was awakened by a loud crash. They rushed to the stranger's room, and there they found him, lying on the floor. He was badly injured and was barely alive. The family tried to help him, but it was too late. The stranger took his last breath, and the family was left with a sense of foreboding. The next day, the family went to the authorities and reported the stranger's death. The authorities investigated, but they couldn't find any evidence of foul play. The family was left with more questions than answers. However, as they were going through the stranger's belongings, they found a journal that he had been keeping. As they read the journal, they realized that the stranger was not a stranger at all. He was a creature from another dimension, who had been sent to their world on a mission. The creature had been trying to warn the family about a looming threat that was coming for their world. The family was shocked and horrified. They had been living with another worldly being, and they had never even suspected it. The creature's journal spoke of a great evil that was coming, and it warned that the family would be instrumental in stopping it. The family was left with a heavy burden, but they knew what they had to do. They banded together and fought against the evil that was threatening their world. They were successful in defeating the evil, but they were changed forever by the experience. They would never be the same again, and they would always remember the stranger who had changed their lives forever. There was a small town that was known for its peacefulness and tranquility. People came from all over to escape the chaos of the city and to enjoy the simple life that the town offered. However, one day, the town was thrown into chaos when a series of strange events began to occur. It started with small things, objects moving on their own, strange noises in the night, and an overall feeling of unease. But as the days passed, the strange events escalated, and people started to vanish without a trace. The town was in a state of panic, and no one knew what to do. The local police department did their best to investigate, but they couldn't find any clues. The disappearances seemed to be the work of a supernatural force, and the police were at a loss. However, one of the detectives on the case was determined to get to the bottom of it. Detective Johnson was known for his tenacity and his unyielding spirit, and he was determined to find the truth. He spent every waking moment working on the case, and he finally uncovered a clue that led him to a strange old mansion on the outskirts of town. As Detective Johnson approached the mansion, he felt a sense of unease. The place seemed to be abandoned, and there was an aura of evil that surrounded it. But Detective Johnson was fearless, and he entered the mansion to see what he could find. As he entered the mansion, he was met with a shock. The mansion was filled with strange, otherworldly creatures, and they were all gathered in one room. Detective Johnson was frozen with fear, but he knew that he had to act quickly. He reached for his gun, but it was too late. The creatures had already seen him, and they were closing in. Just as the creatures were about to attack Detective Johnson, he was suddenly transported to another dimension. He found himself in a strange world, filled with creatures that he had never seen before. He was confused and disoriented, and he had no idea how he had gotten there. But then, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The creatures in this dimension were all wearing the same symbol that was found at the scene of the disappearances in the small town. Detective Johnson realized that he was in the midst of a supernatural force that had been terrorizing the town. However, as he was about to turn and run, he was suddenly approached by a figure who identified himself as the ruler of this dimension. The figure told Detective Johnson that he had been brought to this dimension because he was the only one who could stop the evil that was threatening to spill over into his world. Detective Johnson was shocked, but he knew that he had to act. He banded together with the creatures of this dimension, and they fought against the evil that was threatening both of their worlds. In the end, they were successful in defeating the evil, and Detective Johnson was returned to his world. However, Detective Johnson was never the same again. He was forever changed by the experience, and he was haunted by the memories of the strange world that he had visited. He would always remember the shocking twist that had changed his life forever. Retired cop Jack had seen it all in his days on the force. He had faced dangerous criminals, responded to terrible accidents, and witnessed the worst that humanity had to offer. But he never expected to find himself in a situation like this. One day, Jack was walking in the park when he heard a faint crying coming from a nearby abandoned building. He immediately knew that something was wrong, and he went to investigate. As he approached the building, he saw a small hand reaching out from a broken window in the basement. Jack knew that he had to act quickly, and he called the police. When they arrived, they found that the girl had been trapped in the basement for a week without food or water. She was dehydrated and weak, but she was still alive. The police were able to get her out of the basement and take her to the hospital. However, the girl was too traumatized to speak about what had happened, and the police were unable to get any information from her. Jack felt a strong connection to the girl, and he knew that he had to help her in any way that he could. He spent the next few days by her side, offering her comfort and support. Slowly but surely, she started to open up to him. She told him about the man who had kidnapped her and kept her in the basement, and she revealed that she had been living in fear every day since. Jack knew that he had to do something. He couldn't let the man who had done this to the girl get away with it. So, he set out to find him. He used his skills and experience as a retired cop to track the man down, and he finally found him hiding in a nearby motel. Without hesitation, Jack confronted the man and arrested him. He brought him back to the police station, where he was charged with kidnapping and held without bail. The girl was finally able to get the justice that she deserved, and Jack was hailed as a hero. However, Jack's nightmares didn't end there. He was haunted by the memory of the girl trapped in the basement, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something. He started to investigate the case on his own, and what he uncovered was more shocking than anything he had ever encountered in his years as a cop. The man who had kidnapped the girl was not acting alone. He was part of a larger network of kidnappers who were using abandoned buildings to hold their victims captive. Jack was horrified by what he had found, and he knew that he had to act quickly. He worked with the police to track down the rest of the kidnappers and put an end to their operation. It was a grueling and dangerous task, but Jack was determined to see it through. In the end, he was able to save countless other girls who had been trapped just like the one he had rescued. But even though he was able to bring the kidnappers to justice, Jack was never the same again. The memory of the girl trapped in the basement would stay with him for the rest of his life, and he would always be grateful for the chance to help her and others like her. It was just another routine call for Detective Samantha. She had been a police officer for many years, and she had seen it all. But when she arrived at the old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, she knew that this was not going to be a typical case. As she entered the mansion, she was immediately struck by the feeling of dread that permeated the air. The windows were boarded up, the walls were covered in cobwebs, and there was a thick layer of dust on the floor. She cautiously made her way through the halls, a flashlight beam illuminating the way. As she turned a corner, she heard a faint voice coming from one of the rooms. She approached slowly, her hand on her gun, and she cautiously pushed open the door. What she saw inside made her heart stop. There, lying on the floor, was a young woman who was badly beaten and bruised. She was barely conscious, and she was muttering unintelligibly. Samantha immediately called for backup, and the woman was taken to the hospital. As she waited for the woman to regain consciousness, Samantha started to investigate the case. She soon discovered that the woman had been missing for several weeks, and that there had been reports of strange noises and activities coming from the abandoned mansion. Samantha was determined to find out what had happened to the woman, and she began to dig deeper. She talked to the neighbors, she examined the evidence, and she pieced together a horrifying story. The mansion had once belonged to a wealthy family, but it had been abandoned for many years. It was said to be haunted, and many people avoided it like the plague. However, a group of teenagers had stumbled upon it one day, and they had decided to explore the inside. What they found was a nightmare beyond their worst fears. The mansion was home to a cult that had been conducting brutal and inhumane experiments on the young women they had kidnapped. The cult had been operating for years, and they had taken many young women who had never been seen again. Samantha was horrified by what she had uncovered, and she knew that she had to put a stop to the cult's reign of terror. She worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and tracking down the members of the cult. She finally confronted them in a dramatic showdown, and she was able to put an end to their evil once and for all. The young woman was finally able to go home, and she was reunited with her family. Samantha was hailed as a hero, and she was praised for her bravery and determination. But even though the case was closed, she would never be able to forget the horrors that she had uncovered in the abandoned mansion. The memory of the young woman lying on the floor, battered and broken, would stay with her forever. Once upon a time, a group of people found themselves trapped in an evil dimension. In this realm, there was a large pit of unending fire in the center of the land, and the people would sometimes throw each other into the pit over petty grudges and disagreements. Despite the danger of the fiery pit, the people were bound by a code of conduct. They were not allowed to intentionally hurt one another. Those who broke this rule would often find themselves around a fire pit, as if drawn there by some invisible force. As time passed, the people began to realize the futility of their actions. They saw that their anger and resentment towards each other only led to more suffering, and that throwing someone into the fire pit did not solve anything. Through their struggles and challenges, the people gradually learned to let go of their grudges and work towards a more peaceful existence. They found ways to collaborate and support each other, and eventually discovered a way to break free from the evil dimension. As they emerged from the realm, they carried with them the hard-learned lessons of their experiences. They knew that their path ahead would not always be easy, but they had the wisdom and resilience to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Once upon a time, there was a small village nestled deep in the forest. The villagers were simple folk, living peaceful lives and tending to their crops and livestock. But as the years went by, a darkness began to descend upon the village. It started with whispers and rumors, tales of strange happenings in the forest and unexplained disappearances. As the villagers grew increasingly fearful, they turned to their leader, a wise old man known for his knowledge of the forest and its ways. But even he could not explain the dark forces at work. One night, as the villagers slept, a terrible presence descended upon the village. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and shadows lurked in every corner. The villagers awoke to screams and chaos, as the darkness claimed one after another. The wise old man led the remaining villagers into the heart of the forest, seeking shelter and safety from the malevolent force that had taken hold of their village. But even there, they were not safe. As they huddled together, the wise old man revealed a terrible truth. He had made a deal with the darkness, trading the souls of the villagers for his own power and knowledge. And now, he was the only one who knew how to stop it. The villagers were horrified and betrayed, but there was no time for regret. With the wise old man's guidance, they banded together to fight the darkness, using all the knowledge and courage they could muster. In the end, the villagers emerged victorious, but at a great cost. Many had lost loved ones, and the village was forever scarred by the darkness that had consumed it. The wise old man was never seen again, rumored to have paid the ultimate price for his folly. As the years passed, the villagers worked to rebuild their lives, but the memory of the darkness lingered on. They knew that the forest held many secrets and dangers, and that they could never truly be safe. And so they lived in fear, knowing that the darkness could return at any moment, and that they would be powerless to stop it. In a distant land, there was a great city that rose up from the earth like a monument to human ambition. The people who lived there were proud and powerful, their minds honed to razor sharpness by years of study and discipline. But there was a darkness at the heart of the city, a force that whispered in the ears of the people and threatened to tear them apart. It was a shadowy presence, always lurking just out of sight, that fed on their fears and insecurities. As the years went by, the people grew increasingly divided. They fought amongst themselves, each group convinced that they alone held the truth. They forgot the values that had once bound them together, and the darkness grew stronger with each passing day. In the depths of the city, there was a man who saw the truth. He was a scholar, a wise and learned man who had studied the ancient texts and knew the secrets of the human mind. He understood the darkness, and knew that it could not be defeated with weapons or armies. And so he set out to heal the city, to restore the bonds that had been broken and drive out the darkness that threatened to consume them all. He worked tirelessly, traveling from group to group, teaching them the ancient wisdom that had been lost in their struggles. At first, his efforts were met with suspicion and hostility, but gradually, as the people began to see the truth in his words, they began to come together. They worked to rebuild the bridges that had been destroyed, to heal the wounds that had festered for so long. But even as they worked, the darkness continued to lurk at the edges of their vision, a constant reminder of the struggle that lay ahead. It was a long and difficult journey, but the people had found a new hope, a new reason to believe in themselves and in each other. In the end, they emerged victorious, not just over the darkness that had threatened to consume them, but over the deeper struggles that had haunted them on a subconscious level. They had found a new way of living, a new way of seeing the world and their place in it. And they knew that no matter what the future held, they had the strength and resilience to face it together. James had always felt like something was off about him. As a child, he would hear strange whispers in his head and feel an overwhelming sense of dread that would make him want to hide under his bed covers. His parents told him that it was just his imagination, that he was an anxious child, and that he would grow out of it. But the whispers never went away. As James grew older, they became louder, more insistent, and more sinister. He began to see shadows moving in the corners of his vision, and he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that there were demons lurking in his room. Despite his fears, James tried to live a normal life. He got a job, rented an apartment, and tried to make friends. But the demons inside his head wouldn't let him be. They whispered to him at work, making him paranoid and anxious. They followed him home, haunting his dreams and making him wake up screaming. As time went by, James became more and more isolated. He stopped going out, stopped answering phone calls, and stopped leaving his apartment. The demons inside his head had taken over, filling him with a sense of dread that he couldn't shake. One day, the demons pushed James over the edge. He barricaded himself inside his apartment, convinced that the world outside was filled with darkness and evil. He scribbled frantic notes to himself, warning of the demons that were coming to get him. In the end, the police broke down the door to his apartment and found James curled up in a corner, rocking back and forth and muttering to himself. His eyes were wide and wild, and his face was contorted with fear. The doctors said that James had gone insane from the demons trapped inside his mind. They said that the whispers and shadows were just symptoms of a mental illness, a disease of the brain that could be treated with medication and therapy. But James knew the truth. He knew that the demons were real, and that they were still out there, waiting to get him. He knew that no matter how much medication they gave him, he would never be truly free from the demons that had taken over his mind. His name was Jack, and he was the unluckiest man in the world. No matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, things just never seemed to go his way. He lost his job, his girlfriend, and his apartment all in the span of a week. His car broke down, his phone died, and he got mugged on the way home from the grocery store. Jack tried to stay positive, tried to believe that things would get better. But the more he tried, the worse things got. He was evicted from his apartment, and he had to move in with his parents. He got sick, lost all his money to medical bills, and had to drop out of college. Through it all, Jack remained optimistic. He believed that someday his luck would turn around, that he would catch a break and finally be able to make something of himself. But that day never came. The bad luck just kept piling up, until it seemed like the whole world was against him. One day, Jack decided that he couldn't take it anymore. He packed a bag, left a note for his parents, and walked out the door. He had no plan, no destination, no hope. He just wanted to disappear, to leave behind all the bad luck and misery that had been his constant companion for so long. And that's exactly what he did. Jack wandered for days, sleeping under bridges, begging for food, and avoiding people as much as possible. He was a ghost, a shadow, a forgotten man. And then, one day, he was gone. No one knows what happened to Jack. Some say he drowned in a river, others say he was hit by a car, and still others say he just vanished into thin air. But one thing is certain, he was never found. No trace of him was ever discovered, no sign that he ever existed at all. Some say that Jack's bad luck finally caught up with him, that he was swallowed up by the universe's endless appetite for suffering. Others say that he found peace, that he finally escaped the terrible curse that had plagued him all his life. But no one knows for sure. Jack remains a mystery, a legend, a cautionary tale. A man with so much bad luck that he disappeared and was never found. In a world much like ours, there existed a secret dimension that was accessible only to a select few. Within this dimension, there was a key that held the power to save the world from impending doom. The key was protected by a powerful force, and only those who were deemed worthy could enter the dimension and retrieve it. For centuries, the key remained hidden, waiting for the right person to come along and claim it. One day, a young woman named Sarah stumbled upon the secret dimension by accident. She was a scientist, and she had been working on a top-secret project that involved a breakthrough in interdimensional travel. When she accidentally stumbled upon the secret dimension, she was both frightened and intrigued. As she explored the dimension, she learned about the key and the power it held. She knew that the world was on the brink of destruction, and she realized that the key could be the only thing that could save it. Sarah was determined to retrieve the key, but she knew that the task would not be easy. The force protecting the key was powerful, and it would take a great deal of skill and courage to overcome it. Undeterred, Sarah began to plan her approach. She spent weeks studying the secrets of the dimension, learning everything she could about the force that protected the key. She even managed to make contact with others who had attempted to retrieve the key in the past, and she learned from their successes and failures. Finally, the day arrived for Sarah to make her attempt. She entered the dimension with a sense of purpose, knowing that the fate of the world rested on her success. As she moved through the dimension, Sarah encountered a series of challenges, each more difficult than the last. She had to use all her skill and knowledge to overcome them, but finally, she arrived at the location where the key was kept. The force protecting the key was unlike anything Sarah had ever encountered. It was a massive, swirling vortex of energy that seemed to be alive. Sarah knew that to retrieve the key, she would have to face the force head-on. With all the courage and determination she possessed, Sarah charged forward, facing the force with everything she had. In the end, it was a battle that lasted 4 hours, but finally, Sarah emerged victorious. With the key in her possession, Sarah returned to the world of men. She knew that she had the power to save the world, but she also knew that the key was not enough on its own. She would need the help of others who believed in the power of the key and the importance of saving the world. And so, Sarah set out on a new mission, to gather together a team of like-minded individuals who could help her use the key to save the world. It would be a long and difficult journey, but Sarah was ready for it. With the key in her hand and the courage in her heart, she knew that anything was possible. With the help of her team, Sarah was able to unlock the power of the key and use it to save the world from impending doom. She discovered that the key had the ability to manipulate the very fabric of reality, and with it, she and her team were able to rewrite the course of history. But the power of the key was not without consequences. As they used it to reshape the world, Sarah and her team began to realize that the changes they were making were having unintended effects. Time and space began to warp and twist around them, and the lines between reality and fantasy began to blur. In the end, Sarah and her team had to make a choice. They could either continue using the key to try and fix the damage they had caused, or they could destroy it and return the world to its natural state. It was a difficult decision, but in the end, Sarah knew that the key had to be destroyed. She realized that the power it held was too great for any one person to wield, and that the only way to truly save the world was to let go of the power that had caused so much destruction. And so, with a heavy heart, Sarah and her team destroyed the key, sending it back to the secret dimension from which it had come. They knew that the world would never be the same again, but they also knew that they had done the right thing. In the end, Sarah returned to her life as a scientist, but she carried with her the memories of the incredible adventure she had been a part of. And she knew that, even though the key was gone, its legacy would live on, inspiring generations to come to believe in the power of hope, and the ability of even the smallest person to make a difference. When she was just a child, Emily had heard stories about a key that could unlock a secret dimension of unimaginable horror. It was said that whoever held the key had the power to unleash the most terrifying creatures from the depths of the unknown. As she grew older, Emily became obsessed with the idea of finding the key. She spent countless hours researching, studying ancient texts and consulting with experts on the occult. And finally, after years of searching, she found it. But when Emily unlocked the secret dimension, she quickly realized that the stories she had heard were not just legends. The creatures that emerged from the portal were more terrifying than anything she had ever imagined. They were twisted, misshapen monstrosities, with razor-sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. They slithered and crawled their way through the portal, driven by an insatiable hunger for human flesh. At first, Emily tried to fight them off, but they were too powerful. She watched helplessly as they devoured her friends and family, one by one. And soon, she knew that she was next. In a desperate attempt to stop the creatures, Emily destroyed the key, hoping that it would close the portal and trap the monsters back in the secret dimension. But it was too late. The creatures had already taken root in the real world, and they were spreading. Emily spent the rest of her days as a recluse, haunted by the knowledge of what she had unleashed upon the world. She knew that she could never fully atone for her mistakes, but she made a vow to do everything in her power to stop the creatures from spreading. And so, Emily spent the rest of her life fighting the creatures, one by one. It was a never-ending battle, but she knew that it was her duty to protect the world from the horrors that lay just beyond the portal. And even though she was consumed by fear and regret, she knew that she was the only one who could save humanity from the creatures that had been unleashed by her own curiosity. As Emily continued to battle the creatures that had been unleashed from the secret dimension, she discovered a way to send them back. It wasn't an easy task, but it was the only hope that she had of saving humanity from the horrors that she had unleashed. She spent years researching and experimenting, searching for a way to close the portal and send the creatures back to where they came from. And finally, she discovered a powerful ritual that could banish the creatures back to the secret dimension. But the ritual required a sacrifice. Emily knew that she would have to offer up something of great value in order to seal the portal and end the creature's reign of terror. So she made the ultimate sacrifice, offering up her own life in exchange for the safety of humanity. She performed the ritual, channeling all of her energy into closing the portal and sending the creatures back to their world. As she completed the ritual, Emily felt her body grow weak, and she knew that she had only moments left to live. But she also knew that her sacrifice had not been in vain. The creatures were banished back to their world, and the portal was closed forever. Humanity was safe once again, and Emily's memory was honored as a hero who had given her life to protect others. As the years passed, people remembered Emily's sacrifice and told her story as a cautionary tale. They knew that curiosity could be a dangerous thing, and they vowed to never again meddle with the unknown. But despite the tragic end of her story, Emily's legacy lived on, a testament to the power of selflessness and the importance of protecting the world from the horrors that lay just beyond our understanding. For centuries, a powerful key had been hidden on Earth, kept safe from those who sought to use it to destroy the world. The key had the ability to seal off a dangerous dimension that held unimaginable horrors, and it was said that if the wrong person got hold of it, the consequences would be catastrophic. Despite the best efforts of the guardians of the key, an evil character had somehow learned of its existence and was determined to find it. He knew that he could use it to open the dimension and unleash its horrors upon the world. The guardians of the key did all they could to protect it, But the evil character was cunning and relentless. He employed every means at his disposal to find the key, leaving no stone unturned in his quest. Eventually, he found a way to break through the dimensional barrier and enter the realm that held the key. It was a perilous journey, and many would have given up long before he had, but he was driven by his desire to obtain the key and bring about the end of the world. With great determination and cunning, the evil character finally found the key. He held it aloft, a cruel smile playing across his lips as he prepared to unleash the horrors of the dimension upon the world. But as he inserted the key into the lock, something strange happened. The key began to glow, and the dimensional portal began to shrink and collapse in on itself. The evil character was suddenly thrown back, as if by an unseen force, and he was consumed by the closing portal. In that moment, the guardians of the key appeared, having used their powers to summon the energy required to seal off the dimension for all time. The key had been a trap, a test of character and determination to weed out those who would abuse its power. The world was saved from the horrors that lay beyond the dimensional portal, and the evil character was never seen again. The guardians of the key returned it to its hiding place, knowing that it would always be safe from those who would seek to use it for their own nefarious purposes. And as the years passed, people came to understand the importance of keeping the key hidden and protected, for the fate of the world could rest in the hands of just one person. Ethan had always been fascinated with the idea of exploring abandoned places, so when he heard about the old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, he knew he had to check it out. The mansion had been abandoned for years, and was said to be haunted by the ghosts of the previous owners, who had all died mysterious deaths. Undeterred, Ethan made his way to the mansion one night, and with nothing but a flashlight and his sense of adventure. As he made his way through the dusty, cobweb-filled rooms, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. But he brushed it off as his imagination, and continued his exploration. It wasn't until he reached the basement that things took a dark turn. As he descended the creaky stairs, he heard a faint whispering in the darkness. At first, he couldn't make out what was being said, but as he got closer, the whispering became louder. It was then that he saw her, a ghostly figure in a white dress, standing at the far end of the basement. She beckoned to him, her bony finger pointing towards a door that he hadn't noticed before. Without thinking, Ethan approached the door, feeling a sense of dread wash over him. As he pushed the door open, he was met with a blinding light. When his eyes adjusted, he found himself in a large, circular room. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on the pedestal was a small, silver key. Ethan knew what the key was for. It was said to be the only thing that could seal the portal to the underworld that lay beneath the mansion. But before he could grab the key, a voice spoke out from the shadows. "I've been waiting for you, Ethan," said a voice. "I knew you'd be foolish enough to come here." Ethan spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. And then, he saw him, a figure dressed in black, with glowing red eyes and a sinister grin. "You can't have the key," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "It's too dangerous." But the figure just laughed. "Oh, I'm not after the key," he said. "I'm after you." And with that, the figure lunged towards Ethan, and the two engaged in a fierce struggle. Ethan knew he was outmatched, but he refused to give up. He fought with all his might, determined to protect the world from the evil that lay beyond the portal. In the end, it was a close battle, but Ethan emerged victorious. The figure lay on the ground, defeated, and Ethan reached for the key. As he picked it up, he felt a surge of power flow through him, the power to seal the portal, and save the world from destruction. With the key in his hand, Ethan made his way back up the stairs and out of the mansion. He knew that he had just faced a great evil, but he felt a sense of pride knowing that he had come out on top. But little did he know, the evil he had faced was just the beginning. The battle between good and evil was far from over, and Ethan would soon find himself facing even greater challenges in the days to come. In the days that followed, the man faced even more daunting challenges. He encountered dark, winding forests and treacherous, icy mountains, all while being pursued relentlessly by the shadowy figure. The man's food and water supplies dwindled, and he grew weak and tired. The shadowy figure was always one step behind him, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. As he journeyed deeper into the unknown, the man found that the very air around him seemed to thicken and constrict his movements. He was filled with a sense of dread and apprehension that he couldn't shake, even as he continued on his quest. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of hardship and struggle, the man arrived at the entrance to the dimension. He found that the key was guarded by a powerful and malevolent entity, one that seemed to be composed of pure darkness. The man battled fiercely with the entity, using all of his strength and cunning to fend off its relentless attacks. Just when he thought all hope was lost, he remembered the words of the wise old man, and he called upon the power of his inner light. The man felt a surge of energy and strength, and he pushed back against the darkness with all of his might. The entity was thrown back, and the man finally claimed the key. With the key in hand, the man used all his remaining strength to close the dimension and seal away the darkness forever. The world was safe once again, but the man knew that the memories of his harrowing journey would stay with him forever. Marissa loved to hike in the woods near her house. One day, she decided to explore a new trail that she had never taken before. As she walked, she noticed that the woods seemed unusually quiet. She couldn't hear the chirping of birds or the rustling of leaves in the wind. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Marissa turned around, but no one was there. She started walking again, and the footsteps continued. She turned around again and saw a figure in the distance. It was a man, and he was walking towards her with a strange expression on his face. Feeling uneasy, Marissa quickened her pace. But the man continued to follow her. When she finally reached her car, Marissa turned around one last time, but the man had vanished. As she drove home, Marissa couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. When she got home, she went straight to bed, exhausted from the hike. As she closed her eyes, she felt a hand reach out from under the bed and grab her ankle. Marissa tried to scream, but the hand tightened its grip. She tried to pull away, but it was no use. The hand started to pull her under the bed. In a panic, Marissa kicked and thrashed, trying to break free. Suddenly, the hand released her, and she fell to the floor. She quickly crawled out from under the bed and turned on the light. As she looked around her room, she realized that there was no one else there. But then she noticed that the window was open, and there were footprints on the windowsill. From that night on, Marissa never went hiking alone again, and she always made sure to lock her windows and doors before going to bed. Samantha had always been fascinated by the abandoned mansion on the hill. It had been abandoned for years, and there were all sorts of rumors about what had happened to the family that used to live there. One day, Samantha decided to explore the mansion on her own. She climbed up the hill and crept through the overgrown gardens, making her way to the front door. Once inside, Samantha found that the mansion was even more beautiful than she had imagined. However, as she made her way through the rooms, she started to feel like she was being watched. Suddenly, she heard a noise coming from upstairs. Samantha cautiously climbed the stairs, and when she reached the top, she saw a figure standing in the shadows. As she approached the figure, she realized that it was a young girl, no older than 10 years old. The girl was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and she had a haunted look in her eyes. The girl revealed to Samantha that her family had been brutally murdered by an unknown assailant, and that her spirit had been trapped in the mansion ever since. Samantha promised to help the girl find peace and solve the mystery of her family's murder. Together, they searched the mansion for clues, and eventually, they found a hidden room that had been sealed off for years. Inside, they found a diary that belonged to the girl's mother. The diary contained a chilling confession: the mother had murdered her own family in a fit of madness. With the mystery solved and the girl's spirit finally at peace, Samantha left the mansion, vowing to never forget the horrors that she had witnessed. There was a small, isolated village tucked away in a valley surrounded by dense forest. The villagers lived a simple life, relying on the land for food and resources. But every year, as the leaves began to turn red and yellow, a terrible tragedy would occur. One by one, the children of the village would disappear, taken by an unknown force in the night. The parents searched desperately, but no trace of the missing children could ever be found. As the years went by, the villagers began to fear the arrival of autumn, knowing that their children were not safe. Some tried to leave the village, but the forest was too dangerous to travel through alone. One year, a new family moved to the village with a young daughter. The parents were warned of the danger, but they were not afraid. They believed that they could protect their child. But when autumn came, their daughter vanished, just like the others. The parents searched and searched, but found nothing. Desperate to find their daughter, they turned to an old wise woman who lived alone in a small cottage on the edge of the forest. She told them of an ancient ritual that could bring their daughter back, but warned them that it came with a terrible price. Without hesitation, the parents agreed to do whatever it took to bring their daughter home. They followed the instructions given to them by the wise woman and performed the ritual. As they waited in anticipation, the ground beneath them began to shake. A dark fog descended upon the village, and the trees shook with a terrible force. Suddenly, the ground opened up, revealing a dark pit. From the pit emerged a hideous creature, with sharp teeth and long, bony fingers. It let out a terrible shriek and lunged towards the parents, who stood frozen in terror. As the creature dragged them down into the pit, the parents realized too late that the wise woman had not warned them of the true cost of the ritual: their souls. After staring in disbelief at the body of the woman, the protagonist realizes that the entire town is likely infected with the same strange illness. They race back to their car and speed away from the town, their heart racing as they wonder if they've been infected as well. As they drive, they begin to feel strange sensations in their body, as if something is crawling beneath their skin. Panic sets in as they realize that they too have been infected, and they may be doomed to suffer the same horrifying fate as the people of that small town. Desperate to find a cure, they begin to research everything they can about the strange illness, but it soon becomes clear that there is no cure, no hope. They are left to wonder what will become of them, and if anyone will ever find a way to stop the mysterious disease from spreading further. It had been a long, hard week for Lisa. The endless meetings and deadlines at work had left her feeling drained and exhausted. All she wanted to do was curl up in bed and forget the world for a while. But when she finally got home, she found that her apartment had been broken into. The place was a mess, with drawers pulled out and belongings strewn about haphazardly. She knew she had to call the police, but the thought of dealing with more stress and hassle made her feel like giving up. As she waited for the authorities to arrive, she heard a strange noise coming from the bedroom. Heart racing, she crept down the hallway, wondering if the intruder was still inside. When she pushed open the door, she was met with an even greater horror than she could have imagined. The room was empty, save for a strange, shadowy figure that seemed to be moving on its own. Lisa couldn't believe her eyes as the shadowy form took on the shape of her own body, moving and contorting in ways that were physically impossible. She realized that it was a manifestation of all the stress and anxiety that had built up inside her over the years. Petrified, she watched as the shadowy figure grew larger and more menacing, threatening to swallow her whole. It was only when Lisa was on the brink of giving up that she remembered something her therapist had told her, that the best way to fight anxiety and stress was to confront it head-on. With newfound courage, Lisa stepped forward and faced the shadowy figure, determined to take control of her own fears. In that moment, the creature began to shrink and fade away, leaving Lisa feeling stronger and more empowered than ever before. As she picked up the pieces of her broken life, Lisa knew that she still had a long road ahead of her, but she also knew that she had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Once there was a man named Jack who lived a normal life until one day he discovered he had the ability to ignite things with his bare hands. He could set anything ablaze, and he quickly learned to control his power, using it to his advantage. At first, Jack used his ability for good. He became a firefighter and saved countless lives. But as time went on, he realized he could use his power for more sinister purposes. He began robbing banks and setting fire to buildings for the thrill of it. The police soon caught on to Jack's crimes, but they could never catch him. He was too clever and always one step ahead. The media ducked in the pyro, and he became one of the most notorious criminals in the country. As Jack continued his reign of terror, he began to lose control of his powers. They became harder to control, and the flames grew hotter and more destructive. He soon found that he couldn't turn off his ability and was consumed by the flames he created. In the end, Jack burned himself alive, and his ashes were scattered into the wind. But some say that his power still lingers, and those who come into contact with his ashes can feel a burning sensation in their hands. The legend of the pyro lives on as a warning to those who seek to use their powers for evil. In the small town of Millfield, there was a legend that had been passed down for generations. The legend spoke of a mysterious entity that would emerge from the depths of the forest on the outskirts of town every few years. It was said to be a creature of pure darkness that preyed on the fears and anxieties of those it encountered. Many had gone into the forest to search for the creature, but none had ever returned. The legend was largely dismissed as a mere folktale, but as time passed, strange occurrences began to happen in Millfield. People reported waking up in the middle of the night to find the creature standing at the foot of their bed. Others claimed to have seen it lurking in the shadows, watching them from afar. As the sightings increased in frequency, so too did the unease of the townsfolk. One day, a young woman named Rachel decided to investigate the legend. She was a journalist who had recently moved to Millfield, and she saw this as the perfect opportunity to make a name for herself. Armed with a camera and a notebook, she ventured into the forest in search of the creature. As she made her way deeper into the forest, she began to feel a growing sense of unease. The woods were unnaturally quiet, and a thick fog had settled over the trees. Suddenly, she heard a rustling in the underbrush. She froze, unsure of what to do. Out of the mist emerged a creature that she could only describe as pure evil. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was a sickly shade of gray, and its eyes were black pits of emptiness. Rachel tried to run, but the creature was too fast. It caught up to her and wrapped its long, bony fingers around her neck. Rachel's life flashed before her eyes. She had grown up in a dysfunctional home, had battled depression and anxiety for most of her life, and had just begun to find a sense of purpose in her work as a journalist. She felt a deep sense of regret, knowing that she would never have the chance to fully live out her potential. As she felt herself slipping away, she suddenly remembered the legend of the creature. With all the strength she had left, she summoned the courage to stare directly into its eyes. The creature recoiled, as if burned by the intensity of her gaze. Rachel used this opportunity to break free and run back towards town. She survived the encounter, but she was never the same again. She had faced her deepest fears and emerged victorious, but the memory of the creature haunted her for the rest of her days. She spent the rest of her life investigating the legend, hoping to find a way to vanquish the creature once and for all. But as she learned more, she began to realize that the creature was not the source of the town's troubles. It was merely a reflection of the dark, repressed emotions that lay buried deep within the hearts of the townsfolk. And until they could confront those emotions head-on, the creature would continue to haunt them. The dollmaker's creation. In the small town of Millfield, there was a dollmaker named Mr. Jenkins. He was famous for creating the most beautiful dolls, each one unique and exquisite in their own way. The dolls were so lifelike that some people even believed they had a soul. One day, a wealthy woman named Mrs. Devereux visited Mr. Jenkins and commissioned him to make a doll that looked just like her daughter, who had died in a car accident. Mr. Jenkins accepted the commission and worked tirelessly to create the perfect doll for Mrs. Devereux. As he worked on the doll, he noticed that it was different from any other doll he had ever made. It seemed to have a life of its own. Mr. Jenkins brushed it off as his imagination and continued his work. But strange things began to happen in the town. People reported seeing a little girl wandering the streets at night, dressed in a white dress and carrying a doll that looked just like her. They said that the doll's eyes seemed to follow them wherever they went. One day, a woman brought her young daughter to Mr. Jenkins' shop to buy a doll. As the girl looked around the shop, she suddenly pointed to the doll that Mr. Jenkins had made for Mrs. Devereux and screamed, "That's the girl that visits me at night." Mr. Jenkins realized that the doll he had made for Mrs. Devereux had somehow become possessed by the spirit of his deceased daughter. He tried to destroy the doll, but it seemed indestructible. As the days passed, more and more people in the town began to report seeing the little girl and her doll. Some even claimed that the doll could move on its own. Mr. Jenkins knew that he had to do something to stop the doll from causing any more harm. He went to Mrs. Devereux's mansion and found the doll sitting in a room all by itself. He picked it up and took it outside, intending to destroy it once and for all. But as he lifted the doll, he felt a sharp pain in his chest and fell to the ground. When Mrs. Devereux found him, he was already dead. The doll was gone, and no one in the town ever saw it again. But some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the sound of a little girl's laughter coming from the woods, and that if you look closely, you can see a doll dressed in a white dress sitting under a tree. The old house on the hill had always been a mystery. No one knew who lived there, or what secrets the house held. But when a group of friends decided to explore the abandoned property, they got more than they bargained for. As they crept through the overgrown yard, the group of friends felt an eerie sense of foreboding. The house looked dark and ominous, and the air was thick with an unexplainable tension. But despite their fear, they pushed on, determined to uncover the secrets of the old house. As they entered the house, they saw that it was in a state of disrepair. Cobwebs covered the corners, and dust coated the floors. But despite its dilapidated state, the house was still full of mysterious artifacts and antique objects. The group of friends explored the house room by room, searching for anything that might reveal the history of the old house. But as they moved deeper into the house, they began to feel as though they were being watched. The feeling of being watched soon turned into something more sinister. As they reached the top floor, the friends heard strange noises and whispers coming from behind a closed door. They hesitated, but the curiosity got the best of them, and they opened the door. What they found inside was a room that had clearly not been touched for decades. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, but what really caught their eye was the old wardrobe in the corner. It was covered in chains and padlocks, as if it had been sealed shut for a very long time. Despite the sense of dread that was building within them, the friends couldn't resist investigating the wardrobe. They tried to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. That's when they noticed something strange. The walls around the wardrobe seemed to be shifting and changing. Suddenly, the friends realized they were not alone in the room. Figures began to emerge from the walls, spectral apparitions of people from long ago. The friends screamed and tried to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The figures moved closer and closer, their faces twisted in anger and hatred. The friends huddled together, praying that they would make it out alive. And then, just when all seemed lost, the door burst open, and they were free. As they ran from the house, the friends heard a voice whispering in their ears, warning them never to come back. They never did, but the memory of that terrifying experience stayed with them forever. Julie had always been fascinated by the abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. The asylum had been closed for years, and it was said to be haunted by the ghosts of the patients who had been mistreated there. Julie had always wanted to explore the abandoned building, and one night, she finally got her chance. As she walked through the asylum's dark and dusty halls, Julie felt an eerie sense of foreboding. The air was thick with the smells of mold and decay, and the only sound was the echo of her footsteps. But as she turned a corner, Julie saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure stood in front of her, its face twisted and contorted in a grotesque expression. It was one of the ghosts, come back to haunt the asylum. Julie tried to run, but the ghost was too quick. It grabbed her by the arm, pulling her towards it. The ghost's touch was icy cold, and Julie could feel its anger and rage. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the ghost disappeared. Julie was left alone, shaken but unharmed. She thought it was over, but then she heard a sound that made her heart race. The sound was a faint whisper, but it grew louder and louder until Julie could make out the words. "Get out," the voice said, "before it's too late." Julie tried to run, but the doors of the asylum were locked. She was trapped, alone in the darkness with the ghosts. As she huddled in a corner, praying for a way out, she heard something that made her heart skip a beat. It was the sound of footsteps, coming closer and closer. Julie held her breath, waiting for the worst. But then, a hand reached out to her, guiding her to safety. It was the caretaker of the asylum, who had heard Julie's screams and come to investigate. He unlocked the doors and led her out of the asylum, away from the ghosts and the horrors of the past. Julie never went back to the asylum again, but the memory of that night stayed with her for the rest of her life. She knew that there were some places that were better left unexplored, and some mysteries that were better left unsolved. When Sarah moved into a new house, she thought she had found the perfect home. It was a beautiful old Victorian house with a lot of character, and it was located in a quiet neighborhood. But soon after she moved in, she started to experience strange occurrences that left her feeling uneasy. At first, it was just little things, like objects moving on their own or strange noises in the middle of the night. But then, Sarah began to see apparitions in the house, shadowy figures that moved in the corners of her vision and disappeared when she turned to look at them. Sarah tried to ignore the strange occurrences, telling herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But the more she tried to dismiss the occurrences, the more they escalated. One night, Sarah woke up to find a ghostly figure standing at the foot of her bed. The figure was a woman, dressed in a white dress, with long black hair that covered her face. Sarah tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure approached her slowly, until it was hovering right over her. Suddenly, the figure vanished, leaving Sarah gasping for breath. But the next night, it was back again, and the night after that. Each time, it seemed to be getting closer and closer to Sarah. Sarah tried to leave the house, but something kept pulling her back. She felt as though the house had a hold over her, as though it was trying to keep her there. And then, one night, she discovered the reason why. In the basement of the house, Sarah found an old trunk filled with old letters and photographs. The letters told the story of a woman who had lived in the house many years before. Her name was Emily, and she had been in love with a man who had betrayed her. Emily had never been able to leave the house, even after her death. and she was now trapped there, haunting anyone who tried to live in the house. Sarah knew then that she had to leave the house. She packed her bags and left that very night, never to return. But she knew that the memory of Emily would stay with her forever, haunting her dreams and reminding her of the dangers of living in a house with a dark past. The town of Blackwood had always been a quiet and peaceful place, until the night that the fog rolled in. It started slowly, a thick mist that crept through the streets and alleys, but soon it had grown into a suffocating blanket that covered the entire town. At first, the residents of Blackwood thought it was just a natural phenomenon, nothing to be afraid of. But as the days passed, the fog seemed to take on a life of its own. It moved in unnatural ways, twisting and curling like tendrils of smoke. And then, people started to disappear. At first, it was just a few here and there, but soon it was dozens. The fog seemed to swallow them up, leaving no trace of their existence. The remaining residents of Blackwood were terrified, holed up in their homes and praying that they wouldn't be the next to disappear. But then, one night, there was a knock at the door of every house in the town. The people who opened the doors found themselves face to face with a figure dressed in black, with eyes that glowed like hot coals. The figure spoke in a whisper, promising to spare the residents if they gave it something in return. And so, the people of Blackwood made a pact with the figure in black. They offered it their most precious possessions, their loved ones, and even their own souls. And for a time, the fog lifted, and the town returned to some semblance of normalcy. But the figure in black always returns, demanding more and more from the people of Blackwood. And so they live in a constant state of fear, waiting for the day when the fog will return, and they will once again have to make a terrible sacrifice to keep a figure at bay. The old house on the hill had always been shrouded in mystery. It was a dilapidated mansion, with boarded-up windows and a large gate that was always locked. But when a group of teenagers decided to explore the house, they got more than they bargained for. As they made their way through the overgrown gardens, the teenagers felt a sense of foreboding. The house seemed to loom over them, and the air was thick with an unexplainable tension. But despite their fear, they pushed on, determined to uncover the secrets of the house. As they entered the house, they heard strange noises and whispers coming from the dark corners. But the teenagers ignored the warning signs, eager to discover what lay ahead. And then, suddenly, one of them disappeared. The other teenagers searched frantically for their friend, calling out his name, but there was no answer. As they searched, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold, the sound of someone whispering their names. The teenagers followed the sound, their hearts pounding with fear, until they reached the basement of the house. And there, they found their friend, tied to a chair and surrounded by dark figures with glowing eyes. The figures turned to face the teenagers, and they saw that their eyes were not human, they were the eyes of demons. The teenagers tried to run, but the figures were too fast. They were trapped, with no way out. And then, the figures started to chant, in a language the teenagers could not understand. The room started to shake, and the walls began to bleed. The teenagers screamed, but their screams were drowned out by the deafening roar of the demons. And then, suddenly, the room was quiet. The demons were gone, and the teenagers were left alone in the basement of the old house. But they knew that they would never forget the horror they had witnessed, and they would never be the same again. The abandoned amusement park had always been a source of fascination for the locals. It was an old park that had been shut down for years, with rusted rides and overgrown pathways. But one group of teenagers decided to explore the park, thinking it would be an adventure. As they walked through the park, they noticed something strange. The rides seemed to be moving on their own. The Ferris wheel was turning, the bumper cars were moving, and the roller coaster was creaking along the track. But there was no one there to operate them. The teenagers were scared, but they pushed on, thinking it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. But then, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold, the sound of children laughing. The teenagers followed the sound, thinking that maybe there were kids playing in the park. But as they turned a corner, they saw something that made them freeze in terror. They were children, but they were not normal children. They were pale, with empty eyes and twisted limbs. And they were all staring at the teenagers with a hungry look in their eyes. The teenagers tried to run, but the children were too fast. They chased the teenagers through the park, their laughter turning into high-pitched screams. The teenagers stumbled and fell, but the children kept coming, their fingers clawing at the air. And then, suddenly, the park was quiet. The teenagers were gone, and the children disappeared into the shadows. But the locals knew that they would never forget the horror they had witnessed in the abandoned amusement park. And they would never go near that place again. The old house on the hill had always been shrouded in mystery. People said it was cursed, that anyone who entered never came back out. But one group of friends dared each other to spend the night in the house, thinking it would be a thrill. As they explored the house, they noticed something strange. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with the scent of incense. They didn't know what it meant, but it made them uneasy. As they settled down for the night, they heard a sound coming from the attic. It was a soft whisper, barely audible, but it was there. The friends tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind. But then, the whisper grew louder, until it was a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once. The friends were terrified, and they huddled together in fear. They tried to leave, but the doors were locked, and the windows were barred. They were trapped in the house, with the voices growing louder and more frantic by the minute. And then, the friends saw something that made their blood run cold. It was a figure, draped in black, with eyes that glowed like fire. It moved slowly towards them, with a low, menacing growl. The friends were paralyzed with fear, unable to move or scream. And then, suddenly, the figure was gone, and the voices disappeared. The friends stumbled out of the house, their minds shattered by the horror they had witnessed. They never spoke of that night again, but the memory haunted them for the rest of their lives. And the old house on the hill remained a place of darkness and terror, a place where the dead never truly rested. The small town had always been quiet, but there was a rumor that circulated around the residents. There was a house at the edge of town that was said to be haunted. It was an old, run-down place that had been abandoned for years. But one day, a family moved in, ignoring the warnings of their neighbors. As the family settled into the house, strange things began to happen. Doors would open and close on their own, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls. The family tried to brush it off, thinking it was just their imagination. But then, they saw something that made their blood run cold. It was a figure, draped in black, with glowing red eyes. The family was terrified, and they tried to leave, but the doors were locked, and the windows were barred. They were trapped in the house with the ghostly figure, which seemed to be getting more and more aggressive by the minute. And then, the family realized that the ghost was not alone. There were others, trapped in the house, their souls unable to rest. They were screaming, begging for release, but the family couldn't help them. They were too frightened, too overwhelmed by the horror that surrounded them. In the end, the family was never seen again. But the house remained, a place of darkness and despair, a place where the dead and the living were forever intertwined. And the people of the small town knew better than to go near that house, knowing that the spirits within would claim anyone who dared to enter. The forest was always a mysterious and eerie place, but no one could have predicted what was lurking in the shadows. A group of friends had gone on camping, thinking it would be a fun and adventurous weekend. But as the night fell, they realized they were not alone. They could hear the sound of footsteps, but no one was there. They could see a shadowy figure lurking in the distance, but as they approached, it vanished into thin air. And then, they heard a voice, whispering in their ears, promising them a fate worse than death. The friends were terrified, and they tried to leave, but they couldn't find their way out. The trees seemed to close in on them, blocking out the moonlight and the stars. They were lost, trapped in the forest with the unknown entity that seemed to be stalking them. As the night wore on, the friends became more and more desperate. They were cold and hungry, and they could feel the presence of the entity growing stronger. And then, suddenly, it attacked. It was a figure, with eyes that glowed like embers, and claws that glinted in the darkness. The friends tried to fight back, but they were no match for the entity's strength. It was like fighting against a shadow, a force that could not be defeated. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the entity was gone. The friends stumbled out of the forest, their minds shattered by the horror they had witnessed. They knew they had come face to face with something beyond their understanding, something that had claimed them as its own. And the forest remained a place of darkness and terror, a place where the entity roamed, waiting for its next victim to cross its path.